I don't know what finally compelled me to share this, but I've been thinking about it a lot these past few days and thought that it'd fit here pretty well. I'm one of those longtime lurkers who's been sitting on their own story for ages, but I finally got around to writing my experience down in the hopes that there's someone out there that finds this interesting to hear. Apologies in advance for the length. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and it was the first and only time that I felt legitimately afraid for my life. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's a long ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood. It's about a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big, scenic California Valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years before, and the property value had skyrocketed since. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot, and although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside of our house. Although my mom was especially protective of us, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. My mom grew up in the neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers bar before we would make our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was this small camper parked on the side of the road opposite of the gas station, right along the back side of the fence of another set of houses. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive that someone was living inside of it, because at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly as I passed by the camper door. I'd always keep an eye on it, out of fear that one day it'd just swing open as I happened to walk by. I think what bothered me the most was this drawing that was taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy, a sketch of odd lines in a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, some vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerve to stop and stare long enough to really investigate it, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to this incident that I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just gone to the park nearby and, unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when we walked past it. This time, I felt a little more brave, actually. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was just feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper itself was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked printed paper in black coffee to make it look aged. That's what this reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing that I'd stopped following her, but my eyes stayed fixed on that indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach kind of turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say that the drawing was a badly deformed fetus inside a mass of large, perfect circles, like those made by using a compass. The face of the fetus was contorted, as if it were in pain. It was so graphically disturbing and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days after. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body and my chest hurt with fear, but I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. Ever since my ill feelings towards this camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by. And about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie's. She knew that we wanted our snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified that she'd make us cross the street to go check it out. It was a bright sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling much more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately put me on edge. It was almost like a splash of cold water right to my face. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of just about everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. These were accompanied by a heavy rustling sound, like a heavy backpack, and nervously, I half turned my head to look. That's when I saw a man with a long, unkempt beard and wearing many layers of ragged clothing walking behind us, his eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was like a drunken shuffle, almost as if each of his feet were unimaginably heavy and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arch to his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step that he took. But rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction like a zombie, with a direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized that this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes now filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again. The wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way. Speaking carefully under her breath, she said, "On the count of 3, we run straight to Grandma's house." She told me this in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood that we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily as we walked faster. But the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start by sprinting our direction before she got to 3. But his footsteps were noisy, and we bounced off like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget this part. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast, we didn't even have the breath to scream. And peering back behind me about 10 seconds into the chase, I saw him running our direction with absolutely none of the impairment that he showed with those zombie-like steps just moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped in order to lower our guards, in hopes that we wouldn't start running. That thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs, just to get as deep into the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adults as quickly as we could. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about. I was desperate to just get back to normal. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy and act like everything was completely fine for the sake of my own sanity. And that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide any additional details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted that he had to have been some bored homeless man just looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know about that. I'd like to believe that it was some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door. I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past that camper in the shade. I believe that he may have chosen that spot between the park and the gas station deliberately, due to the number of kids walking around the area. I don't remember ever seeing that camper again after this day. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of them and all others around. I don't know if maybe the story comes off as melodramatic, but if you were there, it was real and very frightening in a way that I just can't forget. This is likely the scariest, most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. I don't think I've ever been so petrified in my life, and to this day, I still don't know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he's still where I saw him. I'm going to give you guys a geographical description of where this happened. I apologize if it's too long for some of you. I just want everyone to understand how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it wasn't for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting uni. Our home was, and still is, just outside of a small town with forests all around it. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and split off into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forest there well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles walk, at which point the stream was hidden quite deep into the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone or with my dad over the span of 18 years. Never did we see anybody else in the forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone-ish. The first time, I left in the morning. I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands through the cool water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making this bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened as well as I could, wondering if it was a lost hunting dog, and started moving towards the sound. Yeah, you don't have to say it. I know that in a movie, I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so I figured, what the hell? I realized that it couldn't have been on an animal. I could tell that the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was. It couldn't have been on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. The sound stopped completely after about 5 minutes. Now, the stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell, like one that could have been enclosed in a tin or something, and the river was far too still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. At that point, I knew it had to have been a person. I just stopped thinking about it and tried to continue on my walk as normal. That is, until I found a badger, a dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It looked pretty fresh. The body was still limp, and there wasn't too much of a smell coming from it. The wound was filled with maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, and so had I. That's when I start to figure that this badger was put there purposefully, maybe killed there, or at least decapitated there. Certainly an odd and unsettling event, but nothing else happened that day, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. Well, 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and that would be the last time I'd ever venture into that forest. I left home at around 6 p.m. I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour, then decided to go back the way I came because it was starting to get late, in addition to the fact that it was starting to rain as well. The sun usually sets around 9 p.m., but with the clouds and the storm, it was getting dark a bit earlier. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and booming loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. Before I even realized what it was, the smell hit me. It was grotesque and almost made me lose my lunch into my mouth right then and there. As I lifted my eyes up, I realized that it was the decomposing body of that badger, now with its head strung to its front paws. I had to back up a few steps because what I just saw was far from anything I was expecting. The area where its head was sewn on looked a bit like a ham because of the way it was tied. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and now dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. Absolutely repulsive. At first, I just stared at it, slightly gobsmacked by the image. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I think the sensory overload of it all became just a little too much for me. It felt like a bucket of cold ice water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river. So someone had strung this body up after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone knew that I'd see it. So was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and then started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream back towards the path for a while when I started to hear that bell again. I proceeded to phone my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me. I implored him to go as fast as he could and that someone was in the forest with me. I can't explain the feeling that I had. It was like I just shit out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite being soaked. It was now dark and I was jogging as fast as I could, also panicking because the path was still a bit far away, just a little too far off to feel safe with everything going on. It was still raining. Every single sound around me was now muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than the last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. That fear, combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I felt like I couldn't even breathe properly, was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a damn horse at this point, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud, almost like a toddler does. I was tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I was now on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was screaming on the phone at the same time that they were now on the path, that I needed to run to them, that my dad had gotten out and was now heading east from the path bend. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half-running, half-speed walking thing again because I was so out of breath. Then I heard branches break, clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest. And that bell ringing louder than ever before. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell that he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers. But when I tell you I ran for my life, I did just that. And I didn't fucking look back once. I screamed as loud as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path. Dad, can you see me? I'm here. I really wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that one to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard while also screaming for my dad. I felt shivers run all down my neck. Then they just switched off. I just ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized that I didn't have it anymore when I was safely in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home at that point. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. Autopilot. I don't know if that man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears, as well as the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name, and I knew he was coming my way, and that he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much threw myself at him when we got close to each other. At that point, my dad heard the bell too. My mom could only hear it on the phone. She was waiting with the car ready to leave fast. My dad and I made it out of the forest in pretty short order, and while the bell sounds eventually began to fade, we heard them for the entire hike back to the car. Once in the back seat, I was finally able to catch my breath. Both my parents asked questions. I did what I could to answer them, but eventually they stopped talking altogether. I think it was clear to them that talking this out was only making me more frantic. For the last 15 minutes of the car ride home, nobody said a word. You might have thought the silence would allow for some sense of calm or gathering of oneself. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We were now miles away from it, but still all I could hear was the sound of that bell rattling between my ears. Now, with this being years in the past, my best guess is that someone was living out in that forest. For how long, I wouldn't know. Were they mentally well? I haven't the slightest. But am I glad that I didn't have to learn the answer to that question that day? Absolutely. My mother became a widow this past October. She and my dad had been together for 48 years, practically their entire adult lives, and his death devastated her. She's always been a beautiful, classy woman, and even in her mid-60s, she still turns heads. She's always been loyal to my dad, never even looked at another man, but that didn't mean other men weren't looking at her. One of these guys, we're going to call Todd. Todd had known my parents for years. They were all regulars at the same local bar. Not together, just familiar faces that ran in similar circles. And after my dad passed, Todd saw an opening. It started with these small gestures, the kind of thing that might seem harmless on the surface, but it escalated into something wholly unsettling. About a month after my dad's passing, Todd began showing up at my mom's job. She decorates cakes at a local store, and it's normal for regulars to stop by and chat with her. But Todd's conversations were different. He'd make comments that proved that he'd been looking her up online, identifying her exact age, her birthday, even reciting her phone number back to her. At first, my mom brushed it off. She clearly didn't think much of it, even though these are obvious red flags in my book. Todd started calling her. A lot. He'd stop by the store more frequently and even insist on coming over to her house. He wouldn't ask. He would insist. She would say no, but he'd show up anyway, being overly pushy until she'd let him in. Then he'd sit with her, try to stretch the visits out, and act like they were something more than they were. This went on for weeks before I learned about it. When I came home to visit my mom, she told me that she had a friend coming over and that this was a man. I told her that I was fine with it. My dad would have wanted her to move on eventually, to find happiness again. But she was quick to clarify that they weren't dating and warned me that he often acted like they were, even though that wasn't the case. When Todd showed up, I immediately saw what she meant. The way he behaved around her was as if they'd been a couple for months. He tried to hold her hand, rested his hand on her leg, ignored all of her repeated comments that they weren't together. When she stepped into another room, he turned to me and launched into this dramatic speech about how much she meant to him. He even started crying, saying how she had sunk into his arms, while sobbing over my dad, as if her grief was some sign of affection for him. Then he launched into criticizing her, saying she spent too much money, trying to insert himself into her personal life. He even told her she wasn't allowed to go out with me and my daughter that weekend. The most disturbing part of all of this? My husband recognized Todd's name immediately. Todd had worked with my husband years earlier, and he didn't hesitate to describe him. Manipulative, vindictive, a snake in the grass. He told me that Todd had been fired for stealing company time, and then I remembered something from over 15 years back. Todd had once told my husband that he would have been married to my mom if it weren't for my dad. At the time, that was something we all laughed off, but now it made my stomach turn. This man had clearly been obsessed with my mom for decades, and things only amped up from there. The next day, Todd showed up uninvited once again, claiming he wanted to see her hair after a salon appointment. He also seemed overly interested in our plans for St. Patrick's Day, mentally noting details as we spoke. Sure enough, he brought it up again later, trying to insert himself into our plans. I told my mom point blank that he wasn't coming with us, and to my relief, she agreed. She admitted she didn't really like him that much anyway, and wasn't interested in anything with this man. But moments later, Todd knocked on the door again. He claimed that he had left his phone inside, even though they'd never been in the room where he eventually found it. It felt like he used this as an excuse to come back. Whether it was purposeful or accidental, I don't know, but that's the way it felt. That was when my husband and I decided that enough was enough. We urged my mom to contact her workplace and the police, and even let her neighbors know about the situation. She finally admitted that Todd had been stopping by uninvited and calling her constantly, even after she told him to stop. He'd also told her that he was going through a divorce, though it hadn't been finalized because he was still on his wife's insurance. I get that, but my mom then casually says, "Well, I hope you didn't seek out a lawyer on my account or anything." That's when Todd drops that he just paid the lawyer $5,000 to get this divorce done and over with, implying that my mother now owed him something because of it. It gets even weirder though. My uncle had a run-in with Todd when he delivered tires my mom had paid for. Instead of saying hello or introducing himself, Todd's first words were, "How old are you?" He then glared at my uncle with hostility, clearly jealous. He also spread a lie to my mom, claiming that my dad had once offered to do drugs with him, an obvious attempt to tarnish my father's memory. It was like he was competing with a man who wasn't even alive anymore. Then came St. Patrick's Day. Todd showed up at my mom's job unannounced and demanded her car keys, saying that he was taking it to go get it washed. She refused though. She also told him finally and directly that he was not welcome at her house, that he couldn't call her anymore, and that whatever he thinks that they were in the middle of, they're done. She told him that our family didn't think he was good for her, and that she trusted my and my husband's judgment. But things didn't end there. While I was on the phone with my mother later that day, she started hearing loud pounding on the door. Todd had shown up once again, of course, uninvited. He knocked for a cool 15 minutes before leaving a note on the door and asking her to call him. I told my mom not to do that. I texted him instead, saying that there was nothing that he had to discuss with my mother, that she had made her decision and he needed to respect it. He responded by demanding to know who had said what about him. I told him that it didn't matter. Our feelings about him were based on our own experiences. He called me repeatedly, pleading for me to speak with him on the phone. I refused, telling him again and again that my mom didn't want contact and that we'd notified her work, her neighbors, and the cops. After this point, he never contacted us directly, but a few days later, a mutual acquaintance showed up at my mom's workplace with a message from Todd. He said that he wouldn't bother her anymore, but if she wanted to call him in a few weeks after things settled down, that she could. That was another really strange thing about all of this. Even after being told in no uncertain terms to stay away, he was still clinging to the hope that she'd reach out. That part also terrified me because he knew that we were leaving town soon and my mom would be back on her own. I don't know what's going to happen once we're gone, but I do know that Todd's behavior has gone far beyond a simple crush or misplaced affection. This is obsession. It's calculated, manipulative, and potentially dangerous. My mom has been through enough heartbreak already, and the last thing she needs is someone like him trying to insert himself into her life by force. This happened to me during my junior year of college. For context, I'm a 22-year-old female. I was driving from my hometown in the Chicago suburbs to the University of Missouri, which is about a 6-hour drive. I would make this drive every 4 to 6 weeks in order to see my family and my long-distance boyfriend. There are 2 main ways to take to the town my university is in. Stay on the interstate system through central Illinois and St. Louis, or branch out to the back roads after Springfield, Illinois, until picking the interstate back up about 30 miles from my college. I usually took the back roads, simply because it kept me awake with the constant speed limit changes and occasional towns. But this particular time, I opted for the interstate because there was a high potential for winter weather. I was minding my own business, listening to one true crime podcast episode after another, when about an hour from my exit, traffic came to a complete standstill. Great, I thought. It was already way beyond dark at that point. It was also Sunday night, and I just wanted to get home and catch a decent night's sleep before my Monday classes. After a while, emergency vehicles flew past the traffic on the shoulder, indicating that there must have been some sort of accident up ahead. After what felt like forever, traffic slowly started crawling again, and eventually started moving a little as we all passed the accident. This is when it all started. I'll admit, I like to drive fast on the interstate, especially on this particular drive. I mean, what college kid doesn't? I was in the rightmost lane, with a decent amount of space between me and the car in front of me. That's when I noticed someone right on my bumper. Seriously? I muttered aloud. Traffic was no longer super heavy, and this person could have easily passed me in the left lane if they chose to. Well, suddenly, the car began flashing their brights at me and honking. I was extremely confused. I turned off my podcast and kept a close eye on my rear view. The person continued to flash their brights, half blinding me in the darkness through my mirrors. At this point, all I could think was that they were being an asshole, and I floored it into the left lane. I maneuvered in and out of a few cars, attempting to get away from whatever issue this person had, except they followed my every move. Now, being a 20-something female on my own, I began to get a sick feeling in my stomach. I had listened to enough true crime and general horror stories to be just the right amount of paranoid. I had read on social media recently about girls from my school encountering sex traffickers in my town and along the interstates that run through it. One of the town's papers had even run a series of stories regarding multiple sex and human trafficking rings that use this interstate to traffic victims because it basically runs the length of the entire country. I shook that disturbing thought out of my head and continued doing about 85 miles an hour in the right lane, unless I had to move around someone. The car behind me just kept following, flashing its lights and barely letting themselves ever get more than a few car lengths behind me. I finally came up on the exit to my university and I took it. I looked back behind me and the car had followed. It seemed as though the person was trying to get me to pull over. Now I'm wondering, is there something wrong with my car that I can't see? Even if there was no way in hell I was pulling over on the side of an interstate in the middle of a dark, rainy night. That's exactly how urban legends or teenage slasher movies start. At this point, I really didn't know what to do. And looking back, I think I should have driven straight to the local police department, but I was too flustered and scared to think straight. I tried to think back on the last hour or so of my drive. Did I cut anyone off? I didn't think so. I didn't think I had done anything to make any drivers around me this pissed. I'm a relatively good driver, and I tend to mind my own business while out on the road, not engaging in any sort of road rage or anything stupid like that. I began driving towards my apartment, which I shake my head about now. The car continued to follow, still flashing their lights every so often, but no longer honking. They continued to stay glued to my bumper, and that's when I began to panic. What if they followed me all the way home? What the hell should I do now? Call the police and send them on a wild goose chase to look for me in this car as I'm driving around town? As I approached another small exit off a local highway onto a smaller street that ran past campus and toward my apartment, that's when an idea hit. As I got closer to this turnoff, I didn't get into the far right lane. At the very last second, though, I jerked the wheel across 2 lanes and careened across the gravel shoulder, so close to the grass field on the other side that I barely missed driving off the road. As I gunned it down this exit ramp, I glanced up at the overpass. The car had screeched to a halt and was now honking its horn manically. I think I cried the rest of the way home, just the sheer emotional dump, calling my boyfriend and explaining what had just happened over the last several miles. I never got a good enough look at the car to get a license plate number or even a good description of the vehicle itself, so I didn't have anything to report to the police. To this day, I don't know exactly what it was that happened that night. My best guess is that whoever this person was, they saw me when we were all stopped on the interstate, waiting for the emergency vehicles to clear the scene. It's pretty clear from the stickers I have on my car, one on my university's name and one that said Dog Mom, that I was likely a college-aged female. All this person had to do was end up next to me, see that I was a female driving alone on the interstate in the middle of the night, and have all the wrong intentions. I don't think that I need my suspicions confirmed to think that I was in some sort of danger if that car got me to stop alone that night. And I do believe that I dodged something incredibly unfortunate. I still make that drive regularly, although nothing like this has happened since. But I do wonder quite often if this has happened to any other young women on that same stretch of highway. I'm not sure if this is the most creepy encounter that I've ever experienced, but it stuck with me since it happened. I, a 29-year-old female, used to go to this smaller university within my city, where I worked as a bartender at the university bar. I also lived about 5 minutes away from campus, which was really convenient most of the time for naps between classes, but it lost its charm after this encounter. I usually worked day shifts on the days that I didn't have any classes, and my best friend Dan also worked with me at the bar. We're really close, so he would hang out during my shift before relieving me most nights. I've known Dan for years, and although he's a sweetheart, he's often quite oblivious. One day, while Dan was seated at the bar entertaining me during my shift, there was a guy that sat next to him. The guy seemed quote-unquote normal. He was around my age and wasn't bad looking either. He had blonde, disheveled hair and pretty sculpted muscles. He had also clearly come from a construction site because he had work boots on and a hard helmet hanging from his belt. This wasn't unusual because we did have a lot of construction near us, and most construction workers in the area were also students at the university. I struck up a conversation with the guy, going through all the customer service chit-chat that I was used to saying. When I was busy with another customer, he'd turn to Dan and they'd started chatting. Seemed like they got on quite well. However, I could tell every now and again that the guy kept sneaking glances at me, which was flattering the first few times, and not all that uncommon as a female bartender. But the longer he did it, I realized that there was something about him that was off when he looked at me. Rather than being flirtatious, it was like he was watching me. watching exactly what I was doing, where I was going, how I walked, how I greeted people. It started to feel as if he was surveilling me, almost sizing me up even. This really set me off for the obvious reasons, but also because I've dated a couple of abusive, controlling guys in the past, and that behavior seemed all too familiar. This was when he started to loop me in on him and Dan's conversation. He asked if we knew each other. Obvious answer, yes. We had been joking with each other when he arrived. He then asked how we met and kept asking personal questions about the two of us. I already saw his ramp up coming a mile away before he asked if we were dating. Dan laughed because we get that all the time. We're really close and pretty comfortable with each other platonically. Dan, being his oblivious self, said no, and that he was dating his girlfriend, whom I adore, but that I was single. I immediately saw a shift in demeanor from the guy, who then turned to me to smile. Although a pretty ordinary response, it gave me shivers. Many people would just think he was happy to be able to flirt with me freely, but the look in his eyes was telling. He was pleased because it seemed like he wanted me to himself. Now, to take a step back, I know that seems like a slight overreaction, but trust me, I know that type of look, and it was frightening as all hell. After that, he started asking me personal questions specifically. I tried to go help other customers and act busy to avoid them. Sometimes Dan would answer for me, and I swear that dumb kid thought he was wingmanning me, but God, he was so wrong. The guy asked me how old I was, what I was studying in school, where I was from, and all other kinds of normal but slightly invasive questions as a stranger. Finally, Dan got up to get on shift, which meant that mine was almost over. Because the guy didn't really do anything out of the norm, I didn't pull Dan aside, but just patiently waited until I could just go and have a beer far away from the man. As Dan went into the back, the guy turned his sole attention to me. He asked me what kind of shows I like to watch, and I answered half-heartedly as I cleaned up behind the bar. Then suddenly, I looked up and saw that his face was now inches away from mine. He had leaned up onto the bar, and I could smell him. That's how close he was. He then asked me if I lived alone. I did at the time, but there was no way in hell I was telling this creep that. So I gulped, shook my head no, and I said that I had 2 roommates. I thought adding 2 bodies might deter him. He leaned back down onto his seat and hummed. I saw a gleam in his eye that left me convinced that he knew I was lying. At this point, I was internally shaking, which is really frustrating and unusual for me because I often keep up a rather stoic appearance when it comes to creeps. I think he noticed my turmoil, and then he smiled. With a nod, he got up, put on his jacket, and said, "See you later, Gemma." And then he left, just in time for Dan to come out from the back. Dan saw immediately how shaken I was and asked what was wrong. I could barely respond because the thing was, I never introduced myself to the guy. I'd forgotten to, and no one around had said my name. I know this because I asked Dan if anyone had, but somehow this stranger knew my name. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. After that encounter, I was on high alert for about 4 days. Then I got busy with studying and life stuff, and it went to the back of my mind. But not for long. Suddenly, I started seeing this guy everywhere. In the hallways near my classes, at the bar. Coincidence turned into obvious intent, and I was freaked. My university was tiny, and there was very little for me to do to avoid him. My biggest worry was that he had seen the way that I walked home, so I started to ask people to drive me, even though I lived less than 5 minutes away. None of my friends minded because they're very solid, which I'm thankful for. After about 3 weeks of this, I had started to tell my friends what was up. They then started a sort of barrier around me. I was never alone outside of class, and I was always taken home by someone. I started to feel safer, and I had some others to deal with, so the guy sort of left my mind for a bit again. During this time, I bought a pair of old school yellow Vans because I'm a huge fan of retail therapy when I'm depressed or anxious. About 4 days later, I got the notice saying that they were out for delivery, and I was pretty excited. I don't usually buzz delivery guys into my building and often just let them leave a notice so I can pick the package up. But I decided to buzz the guy in this one time. I wanted those shoes, immediate gratification or whatever. Anyway, I had work late and was dropped off at home by a friend around 10 p.m. I was exhausted but still stoked to get my Vans and have a small positive in my life. But when I rounded the corner to my door, my package wasn't waiting for me. This was weird because they always bring your box to your door when it's a private courier, if they're buzzed into the building, that is. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the delivery guy hadn't found my door number or maybe delivered it to the wrong apartment. I unlocked my door, which seemed to stick a little, which was also weird for me. But again, eager to get home, I shrugged that off too. But when I opened my door, something immediately felt off in my apartment. Nothing inside of it was out of place, but it felt like it. I cautiously stepped in my apartment, gripping my keys between my fingers. My other hand was holding my phone tight, just on the verge of pressing down my emergency call button. That's when I turned to the one thing that wasn't there when I left that morning. My package. It was sitting on my kitchen counter with a note next to it. I started to panic and raced through my apartment, wielding my keys like a pair of Wolverine claws. My apartment was small, so it was rather easy to sweep it, and there was no one else there. Just me, my Vans, and the note. Going into survivor mode, I slammed my door, locked and bolted it, and stuck a chair under the handle for good measure. I checked every window to make sure that they were all locked, and that my patio door was as well, which was a sliding glass door. That's when I found the second thing out of place. The security bar that I stick behind my patio door was now under my couch, where you would have had to have been crawling to find it. It was most definitely stuck behind my patio door when I left that morning. I'm sure of it. As you can imagine, this freaked me out even more, but I was just glad that the bar wasn't broken. I placed it back as tight as possible and then went straight towards my kitchen counter, where the bastard had left me my present. My package was open, and my first thought was, hey, that's illegal, before I reminded myself that the guy had literally broken into my home. My shoes were intact, basically untouched, and next to the box was a handwritten note on one of those sticky pads from my desk in the other room. It read, "Small apartment for 3 people. Enjoy your Vans." Now, I'd like to tell you that I called the police and that I got everything sorted out, but that's not how this story wraps up. In fact, all I did was cry the whole night and have around 5 panic attacks. The police can't really do much when the guy hasn't done anything malicious, breaking and entering aside. Plus, there was no way for me to trace all of this back to one guy. One guy that I didn't even know and hadn't seen since our first encounter. But the school term ended right after this, and I didn't have to return to campus until September. I pretty much immediately moved in with my 2 sisters and brother-in-law, so he had very few ways to bother me after that. Not that I saw him again or anything. I can't say for sure how he knew my name, where I lived, or any of that. It's clear that he got in through my patio door, but the why is what trips me out even now. He wasn't there just to retrieve my package from the hallway, and the fact that he let his presence be known by doing just that freaks me out even more. If it weren't for the note and the package, I likely wouldn't have known that someone had been in there. If I found the security rod misplaced, I might have just assumed that I was clumsy or forgetful, which would have opened the door for another visit at the very least. Who knows if that would have come while I was away or at home, if it would have been in broad daylight, or while I was sleeping late at night. Alaska is the perfect place to go if you want to get away from the rest of the world. As America's least densely populated state, you have plenty of breathing room from any kind of authority or prying eyes that may want to know what you're up to. For this reason, my home state is very attractive to all sorts of weird and unsavory groups. I've stumbled across Scientology centers at the end of a dirt back road with nothing else for miles around. Heard stories from doomsday preppers who claim to have bunkers made out of shipping containers in the sides of mountains, and met people who have come out of religious cults in the interior that wanted to keep their followers away from any contact with the outside world. All of this and more you can find in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the only big city in the state. Growing up, we had about 250,000 people in a city that it takes about 30 minutes tops to drive across. So that gives you an idea for what we up north consider a big city. The only other real city here is Fairbanks. These two cities are connected by 360 miles of a 2-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive one way to get between them through one of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet. Mountains rise up on either side of you between Anchorage and Denali National Park before you drive through these colossal canyons, carved out of the rock over tens of thousands of years by melting glaciers and rivers. Past Denali is another 3 hours of driving through a vast, flat interior plain with mountains off in the distance. I say all of this to help you understand just how desolate it feels in Alaska, even on the highway. After you get out of Anchorage or Fairbanks, there's nothing but wilderness as far as the eye can see, save for the occasional small town with a max population of about 1,000 people on a good day. 10 years back, it could have been even less. Alaskan girls are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a great appreciation for the great outdoors that women in the lower 48 don't really have if they're near a city. The joke is that Anchorage is the biggest rural city in the country. All this brings context to the following story. In high school, things were different, or at least they felt different. I was a young and stupid girl who thought I could conquer anything due to the aforementioned built tough attitude that I was raised with. Senior year of high school, I decided to treat myself to a camping trip in the mountains, up past Takitna. Nothing fancy, just an overnight or two in the most beautiful state at the most beautiful time of the year, mid-June. Going up north in peak summer here has a weird feeling to it. The sun never really sets. If you've seen the movie Midsummer, that's what it's like. It gets to about dusk and that's it. It's still bright and sunny out the whole night through. The false sense of security I had thinking that the midnight sunlight would mean safety probably nearly got me killed. Or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I just packed up for my trip, stopped at a Subway for lunch, and headed out into the great beyond. The drive itself was fine. A solid 2.5 hours of driving north along the highway took up most of the afternoon as I jammed out to the greatest hits from the radio on Cool 97.3. After you get through the Matsu Valley, you get into the mountains again. Tall spruce and evergreen trees line the road on both sides with the occasional empty space where there has been some clear-cut logging. All of this gives you a sense that while you're out in the wilderness, you're still connected to civilization in some way. This led me to my biggest mistake, not staying at a state park campground. I was in high school with only a part-time job and didn't want to pay the $15 overnight camp fee. I was too scared to risk the fine, so I found a spot that looked good and I pulled off the road. The map I got from my dad said there was an old mining site up a nearby mountain, so I decided that would be the best spot to head to for an overnight. My logic must have been that it was badass to spend a night in a mining ghost town or something. I pulled off the road, packed up my backpack, put on some bug spray, grabbed that map and a compass, and started off into the woods. Now, this wasn't my first time that I'd done this. I've been on wilderness backpacking trips on my own with my dad through my childhood. I knew my orientation skills and had taken some wilderness survival courses at camp. I wasn't just some dumb blonde wandering off into the woods with no idea of where I was. Or at least, that's what I thought. A solid 45-minute hike up into the hills, and I finally made it to where the old mining camp was supposed to be. But there was nothing there. Just an old concrete foundation with some holes in it, and nothing else. I was pretty disappointed, but unsurprised at the outcome. I set up camp off in the woods and set to building a fire for dinner on that concrete slab. Here, you're supposed to set up cooking a ways off from your camp just in case bears are nosy. The last thing you want is a 1,300-pound grizzly poking his nose into your tent, wondering why you smell like Campbell's soup and s'mores. By this time, it was getting late. maybe 10 p.m., but like I said, the sun was still high up in the sky, and by the time dinner was over, it was nearly 11. I was starving and dug in. About an hour later, it was about as dark as it was going to get, so I hunkered down in my tent for the night, confident that the overgrowth was private enough for whatever animals might come out around then. I woke up in the middle of the night to voices off in the distance and slow-moving crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into a few on some campouts, so it wasn't uncommon. I relaxed and figured they would just pass through without incident, and I closed my eyes again. That's when they found my fire pit. A man's voice cried out into the brightish forest. "Who the f*** is camping on our property?" I froze. I knew I had f***ed up and was getting up, grabbing my purse and putting on my shoes so I could apologize before I heard the man say again, "When we find you, you're fucking dead. You're on private militia property, and trespassers get shot." That's when the whole situation changed for me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just pack up my tent and with some armed guys lurking around. I carefully put my shoes on, put my keys in my purse, and slunk away into the underbrush as quietly as I could. My thought was to slip away, wait until they got bored and left, then go back, pack up, and leave. I spent 20 minutes hunkered behind a log in the woods, barely in earshot before I heard a second voice calling for the others. They had found my tent and were now tearing it apart, going through my stuff. I heard one shout out, "Bed's still warm," and "Trespasser's a chick. She left her underwear." The first man shouted out, "Okay, fan out and find her. Bitch thinks she can trespass? Then there's gonna be hell to pay." At that point, I wasn't concerned that I had left my spare change of underwear in my bag, or that these creeps had found it. My main concern was getting out of there. Quickly, I made my way down the mountain for a good half hour, tiptoeing and taking care not to step on twigs or make a ruckus. After the rustling and shouting of the men had faded quite a bit, I said "fuck it" and booked it as fast as I could in the midnight sun down the hills. I tripped and fell, got scraped up more times than I'd care to remember. Finally, I made it back to the road, but much to my horror, there was no car. I knew I had come out up or down the road from where I'd been. I couldn't quite remember where I was at that time, but I picked a direction and started walking. I rounded a corner on the road and saw my car, as well as two men standing behind it. They were armed and dressed in surplus military gear. I hid in the brush on the side of the road and just watched. A while later, several more men appeared from the trail that I had taken. They dumped all of my stuff next to my car, hopped back on their ATVs, and drove off. I went up to my car, careful not to be seen, and found a note on my dashboard. It read something like, "If we ever catch you on our property again, we won't hesitate to use force. Consider this your warning." I went back to start loading stuff into my car and noticed what they had done. They'd cut up and destroyed all of my gear, likely as punishment for trespassing. Honestly, I'm thankful they did that because I'm just grateful I didn't get shot. Lesson learned. Ever since then, I've taken great care to camp only in designated camping areas. I've been able to duck any and all other Alaskan militia groups using this simple strategy, and I don't see myself going back to my old ways anytime soon. Alaska really is a land of wonder and adventure. That part is undeniable. But you'd be foolish to think that that means you're welcome to set up camp anywhere you see fit. I know that I was. I'm just glad my story didn't end up being more than a fear-filled anecdote, because things could have easily unfolded differently. So, at the start of the year, my boyfriend and I were door dashing on the weekends, as well as some weekdays, doing that late shift, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. We were at it for months and never had any issues with weirdos or any bad situations. But when this happened, it scared us so badly that we've yet to go back out to dash. One night, we had a delivery to one of those apartment complexes that just sucked to navigate. The apartments were inside buildings that you could only access through a locked door, and either the buildings had no labels or they were just extremely hard to find, because we were looking for this guy's section for nearly 5 minutes. It was 1 a.m., dark as hell, and a weekday, so there was nobody around to ask for help. The complex didn't necessarily look sketchy like others we'd been to, so I figured that this was okay. When we finally thought that we found the building, I got out of the car and walked up to the locked door, followed the instructions to get in, and the door doesn't unlock. So I'm trying to get in touch with the customer, letting them know that the door isn't unlocking, and asking if the instructions they gave were accurate. All that jazz. Dude doesn't answer for over 15 minutes. At some point, my boyfriend was standing outside the door waiting with me. There we were, looking dumb as hell, standing outside a locked door with a DoorDash bag for what could only seem like forever. When the man finally answered, he told me that I was at the wrong section. He was at the door and he didn't see any sign of us. At this point, we've wasted so much time waiting that I just took off running towards what I thought was the correct section. I don't really know why I did this. I think I was frustrated and extremely stressed out by the whole situation. I told my boyfriend to get back in the car and to follow me. Well, while I was running, I came across this man who couldn't have been much older than me standing at the back door outside one of the buildings. He's leaning on the rail, smoking a cigarette. I briskly walked up, smiling, holding the bag on display so he doesn't think that I'm running up on him for no reason. I asked if he had a DoorDash order. You're not really supposed to do this. I was just so sure that it was the guy. After all, he was the only person standing right outside of a building. He looked at me for a second, not meeting my eyes, and I could tell that this guy was high as shit. This didn't really bother me though, because everyone smokes in the city, including me, and I can't act holier than thou if you've got the munchies. He answered, yeah, nah, I didn't get anything. His demeanor was a bit off, and it took him way too long to think about whether he had ordered a DoorDash or not, but I just shrugged it off as him being high. I thanked him, apologized, and kept running down the sidewalk to try to find this dang section. I got to the end of the street and looked around, still not seeing a single sign or symbol indicating what the buildings were. I got my phone back out and was hard staring at the map, thinking maybe I could just run to where the customer GPS point is, which wasn't actually that far away from me. I turned around and I saw my boyfriend had finally come around the bend, but he too stopped at that guy standing outside to ask if he had a DoorDash order. His passenger side was facing towards the guy. My partner had the window rolled down, I guess asking him or talking to him or whatever. I don't see this man actually say a single word to my boyfriend, but I do see him get off the rail and start walking to the driver's side of the car, one hand tucked into the pocket of his sweatshirt. That's when this sickening feeling set over me. It's so hard to describe because I had never felt anything like that before. My heart was beating so fast in an instant, and I couldn't feel it. My throat was tight. I felt this immense sense of dread. Every part of me screamed danger. I was sprinting at the car before I even realized what I was doing, and I still clearly remember thinking to myself, no, please don't hurt my baby. I managed to reach the car right as the guy was rounding the front bumper, and with adrenaline flooding my system, I got between him and the driver's side door that he was approaching. I all but thrust that DoorDash bag in front of him with a big fat fucking fake smile on my face. I can't remember the tone that I used, but I know I was insistent, and I said, "This is your order, right? I'm so sorry, I was just really confused by the complex. Here, take your order." He pauses for a minute before taking the bag and going, Yeah, this is mine. My bad, I'm high as fuck," and went back inside the building that he was standing outside of. Immediately, I got my ass back in the car, locked the doors, and told my boyfriend to take us home now. We're done for the night. The entire way home, I couldn't stop shaking. After about 10 minutes of a very quiet drive, the actual customer from the dash that we just did texted me. "Hey, it says it was delivered, but I didn't get it." I just let him know I was sorry, that something went wrong, and I was working with DoorDash to get him a refund or a new order. Once we got home, we did get it all sorted out, but that didn't matter to me. That night we ended up deleting the apps and haven't gone out since. At the time, my boyfriend said he didn't feel threatened, but when we talked about it recently, he admitted that night was why he never wanted to dash again. I don't really know if the guy had malicious intent, but the whole thing was really unsettling. And I will never forget how he approached the car with his hand in his pocket like that. My city is far from the safest, and this is something that I know. The way that man beelined for the driver's side door, not saying a word, dead of night. All of that points to something not so nice happening. I've been robbed once before in my life. I know what it's like to have a weapon thrust in my face. I didn't know it when it happened, but as I've remembered back over the years, that's what it looked like in the lead up. Someone walking at me with far too much momentum, a hand that I couldn't see, and then me having to hand over all my valuables. I know those situations can go sideways in a split second, and I didn't want the man that I love to be faced with that. I'd make the same decision that I made 100 times over, but it's certainly not something that came with no fear. And I definitely hope that I'm never in that situation again, as long as I live. As a child, think somewhere around kindergarten age, I loved to talk. If anyone had a question for me, I would gleefully give them way too much information. Most people found it endearing and would praise me for being so smart, which encouraged me a lot. My mom and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mom had been shopping there for 20 some odd years at this point, and was friends with most of the workers, so I was friendly with them too, and was always happy to talk with them. Whenever my mom would get distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander down and around the aisle. My mom would keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back to her. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having ever been to before. We were walking around the aisles when my mom ran into a friend of hers. They started talking, and I, not realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle like I was known to do. My eyes caught some colorful display. I think it was flowers or balloons or something, and I went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find that my mom wasn't there. That had never happened before. I looked around a little, though not moving from my spot near the colorful displays. Since it was near the registers, there were a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm thankful for now. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister. She was about 13 at the time, and younger than my dad, who was in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I knew how to gauge age at that point. Now I would say that he was probably in his early to mid-20s, if I'm remembering correctly. "Hey there," he said nicely, in a tone that you'd normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little bit closer to him. "Are you looking for your mommy?" I say yes, happily explaining that I had last seen her talking to her friend, and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. Does she leave you alone often?" "No, not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mom wasn't. She was super mature, so if my mom had to leave for a little bit, she knew that I'd be okay. And she never left us alone in public, just at home, if she needed to run somewhere quickly. Never for very long either. Just the length of time of a Pokemon episode or something. And my dad, he was at work a lot. Didn't come back home until late. Just if you were wondering about that detail." "Well, where do you live?" Wouldn't you know it, I just learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school. Even took a little class trip to the mailbox on our school corner to send them out. I knew how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it. Want to hear? Of course you do. I know kids are naive, but I was just downright dumb. I was diagnosed with a form of color blindness a couple years after this. Basically something known as red-green color blindness. Makes sense, as I was totally blind to all the red flags here. "Where do you go to school? Who picks you up?" "Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry. But I know what street it's on because I wait on the sidewalk for my mom or daycare sitter, depending on the day. So I see the street sign a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to get grabbed." Do you like animals?" "Puppies." "I'm scared of dogs and cats. and pigeons. Fish scare me too a little bit. Flies scare me a lot, but you know what doesn't scare me? Turtles. I have 5 turtles. We don't have any dogs that might bark or bite if someone drops by the house. Our neighbor does, though. Those dogs are always behind a gate, so they don't scare me as much. It had only been a few minutes since I last saw my mom, even with how much information I was dumping on this guy. I was a pretty fast talker, but I was starting to get a little antsy. Not because I was uncomfortable talking to a stranger, but because I had skipped lunch that day specifically to con my mom into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which was why we were at that market in the first place. My mom was holding onto the bagel to make sure I didn't try to eat it too fast and choke, which apparently I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was oh so interested in my life, I liked bagels a little bit more. Plus, if I caught my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charm and cuteness to get me a cookie. So, I gotta find my mom now. Oh, okay. Well, I'll walk around with you and help you find her. You mean you want to lead me through the market you work at, where you can easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, or any number of places? Yeah, sounded good to me apparently. Ozzy. That's when I look around to see my mom, the relieved look on her face slowly changing into something more anxious. She immediately grabs my hand, and I can tell she wants to lay into me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or remember that I never even got his name, he quickly says that he's glad that I found my mom, and he needs to get back to work. Then he practically runs to the back of the store. My mom puts her hands on my shoulders and looks me in the eye, her expression far more worried now. "What was he talking to you about?" she asked, her voice more serious than I think I'd ever heard. "Mom, can I have my bagel?" My mom opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me that bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered. My age and grade, pickup schedules, things that I like and dislike, my actual address. My mom gradually became paler, then red with anger. She brought me over to the manager, and I don't remember much about that conversation. I got a cookie. I remember that pretty well. It was shaped like a watermelon, which was apparently far more important to me than paying attention to what was being said by these adults. The police weren't called. We went home, and my mom told me that I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to strangers, even if they worked at the store that we were at, unless she was with me. If I ever saw that man again, I was to run away, find someone that I know and ask for help. And if all else failed, scream at the top of my lungs, just like when a fly lands on me. My mom knew me really well. I agree pleasantly, not really fazed by anything she's saying. I know that some people are bad, but bad people look bad, right? They talk mean and look scary and try to grab you. This guy didn't do any of that, so he wasn't bad, was he? But if my mom was saying it, then I'd listen. And I better enjoy that cookie because we weren't going back to that store ever again. Gonna jump ahead a few years now. When I was around 12, our school had a safety assembly and was talking about the shady things adults do to get close to kids, and a very, very watered down version of what they most likely wanted. I'm sitting there listening, and it's only then that I suddenly realize what had happened all those years back. Oh, if my mom hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store that day, then in front of my school. And if not in front of my school, then maybe at my house. I think it was that day and that moment where I learned not to be such a big mouth. I'm going to tell you the story about the stalker that I've had since I was 16 years old. So basically, to set the scene for you, I'm an average height, average sized 20-year-old woman. I've been told I'm very approachable and perhaps a bit too nice to strangers. I sometimes just don't have the heart to tell people to f*** off, and I definitely should. Obviously, I'm not going to give specific details here, but I worked in a restaurant which was inside of a bigger shopping center. My stalker was this old man named Eric. He worked for the actual shopping center itself and not a store inside it like I did. When I was 16 and first started the job, I was quite timid and a bit awkward and let anyone say pretty much anything to me. I didn't quite know what to say when older customers and other employees would make inappropriate comments to me. I would simply just laugh off whatever people would say or not respond. In my 16-year-old mind, this was the easiest way to handle that type of situation. I had one other friend at my job who was my age, and her name was Jessica. Jessica had worked there for longer than I had, and one day she asked me if I'd heard of this guy who worked in the shopping center called Eric. Jessica described Eric as very strange. She didn't exactly describe him as frightening or unsettling, or even someone to be afraid of, just as this really eccentric man. She and other employees would laugh at his odd sayings and all of his awkward behavior. Jessica had also told me that Eric had brought her a present on Valentine's Day, chocolates. Now, anyone would think that this was friendly behavior or some harmless flirting. If he wasn't a 50-something-year-old man bringing chocolates to a 16-year-old girl that he barely knows. Shortly after, I began to see for myself that Eric wasn't just an innocent old man with a slight crush. The guy had other things on his mind. The first time I remember Eric approaching me was when I was filling up a machine near the entrance of my work. This machine was out of the view of all of the other employees, and the restaurant was empty, so this was pretty much the perfect time for a creep to approach without being seen. Eric wasn't supposed to enter my place of work when he was working at the shopping center, so he had deliberately gone out of his way to come and speak to me. To describe this man's appearance, he's your typical creepy old loner. He was gaunt, had gray hair with bald patches, and had beady little eyes which he never averted from yours, and I can't get them out of my head even to this day. Eric must have snuck up on me. As I looked up, he was standing right next to me, just a little too close. I could feel his breath on my cheek. Instant shudder. "My name is Lucy." Eric asked me, "Lucy, are you married?" He almost giggled after he asked me this. He had the smirk on his face which made me feel as if he was trying to pretend that he thought I was older than I was. And at the age of 16, I looked 16. Eric liked to ask me questions that he already knew the answer to, just to see what my reaction would be, letting me know in his own way that he had been looking up information about me on social media, and this was something that he would do frequently. I began to lock onto the fact that Eric had been going a little further than just approaching me at work, and instead stalking my social media accounts in the weeks following our first encounter. This was only confirmed when he started asking me very specific questions about things I had posted about in the days before. For example, I had posted on Insta about a tattoo that I got, which was in homage to my favorite band. I was serving a customer one day only to be interrupted by a shrill but quiet voice. It was Eric. His eyes were huge, and he had a look of pure excitement and menace on his face. He had yet again entered my workplace when he wasn't supposed to, just to speak to me. He asked me, "Lucy, what's your favorite, insert my favorite band name here, song?" Eric relished in my discomfort, and you could see by my reaction that I was clocking the fact that he had been viewing my personal social media. The tattoo I had gotten was covered by my work uniform, so the only way he could have seen it was by going through my Instagram page. This creeped me out majorly, but somehow I just forced myself to forget all about it and carried on working. Over the course of the next few months, Eric would come into my workplace more and more frequently, asking me bizarre questions and still reciting back to me things that I had tweeted about or posted on Instagram. Every time I would see him, I would get visibly uncomfortable, and it seemed like he liked this. Like this is what he wanted. All while this was happening, Jessica approached me and let me know that Eric had followed her in his car on her walk home from work, slowing down to ask her where she lived. I had also been told other disturbing news about Eric from multiple different sources. It seemed as if he was becoming more invested in whatever his intentions were towards both me and Jessica. News had traveled to one of my managers about Eric's unsettling actions towards us, and this manager informed me that a few years ago, Eric was rumored to have followed a young girl who used to work for our restaurant into the restroom. Things didn't quite make sense to me. He was known for being a creep, yet still employed at the shopping center? On one hand, I was glad to know I wasn't just creeped out for no reason, but on the other hand, I was scared, as apparently he'd been doing this for years and no one had acted to stop him. Anyway, there was this woman who worked at the same place as me named Rebecca, and she had some sort of disability which caused her to befriend and be trusting to people without knowing anything about them. It seems that Eric took advantage of her, as he had asked for her phone number and she readily gave it to him. Rebecca had shown me her text with Eric. He had texted her things like, "Rebecca, are you alone?" And, "Rebecca, are you sat on the bus by yourself?" But the most unnerving part of it all was the text from Eric that read, "Rebecca, could you please let me know any information on the girls that work at insert restaurant name here?" I was stunned. This was slowly turning into my nightmare. I was constantly questioning why this old man was so hell-bent on finding out everything to do with my life. Why me? He'd gone out of his way to source information about me through a vulnerable person that I worked with, and I was scared that he was going to take things further. Again, this creeped me out, but still, for some reason, I forgot about it and carried on with my life, which was very hectic at the time. And in a way, I'm grateful that I didn't have the time to dwell on Eric's growing obsession. But this was something I wouldn't be able to ignore forever, as Eric began inserting himself into my life in ways that I couldn't ignore. One night, I was watching the movie Grease with my family, and I must have tweeted something stupid like, "Grease is my favorite movie," because it is a great movie, right? Anyway, the morning after my tweet, Eric approaches me in his usual way and utters, "Do you like the film Grease, Lucy?" The same usual smirk lit up on his face, and the same usual wave of disgust washed over me. He was really making the point to let me know that he was watching me. I tried to carry on with my day, but spent the entirety of my shift feeling more than a little bit shaken up. To someone hearing this story, it may not seem as unsettling to you as it did to me at the time, but when someone's going out of their way to make sure you know they know information about you, you spend every waking hour thinking about what they plan to do with this information and why they insist on taunting you with the knowledge that they have. The very second I clocked out of work and got into my car, my phone went off. This was a notification from PayPal. I clicked to see what it was, and I had received £3 from Eric Stanley. The note attached to it read, "To Lucy, Grease is the word, from Eric." Okay, now he's found my PayPal account and sent me a little bit of money with a quote from the movie attached to it. If this wasn't crazy enough, in the days following, I received a string of anonymous calls, incessant ones. I was in floods of tears and ended up having this huge panic attack. I felt like there was no escape. My phone would ring and ring all night long. I had to turn it off to get away. Even when I turned my phone back on, the calls would just continue. And every time my phone would ring, my head felt like it was being impaled with the sharpest knife in the world. I was on complete edge. The phone calls that I did answer were just someone breathing down on the other end of the phone, making a point to breathe heavy. I even swear that they were trying to sound as if they were touching themselves, which sickened me. I had no proof that it was Eric. All these calls came from random, different numbers. But it wasn't hard to put two and two together after all the lengths that he had gone through in order to track down my personal information. If he had found out my PayPal address, my phone number, and all of my social media accounts, what was stopping him from finding out where I live, from breaking in, from trying to hurt me or my family? That night, I had these terrible dreams in which he chased me around my house and taunted me for hours. I still have similar dreams and struggle to sleep without my boyfriend present, as I'm scared that Eric might be standing right outside my door. I reported Eric to my managers, and they passed my complaint on to the managers of the shopping center. At this point, I was genuinely scared for my safety. Multiple girls added to my statement and added details of times they had witnessed Eric's weird behavior, or times he had been inappropriate with them too. Eric had been warned by the shopping center's management, yet nothing was done, except for the fact that he was told not to talk to me. Eric found ways around the no talking to Lucy rule. He would make animal noises at me when he would see me, like a monkey or a dog, any sort of bizarre noise that would catch my attention. I think he just wanted me to think that he had outsmarted me, found a way to bend the rules. After this, I eventually stopped working at the restaurant as a full-time job, and I'd see Eric less and less, which was obviously great for me. I moved cities as I went away for university, and I made new friends, which distracted me from my old life in my hometown. I still thought about Eric every now and then, and when I focus on it for too long, I can't be alone, out of the fear that he's still somewhere keeping tabs on me. That thought terrifies me. After moving away and starting my new life, I forgot all about that twisted little man who used to obsess over me at my old job. At times I forgot he existed, but I was soon going to remember him. On Christmas Day, I was back home in my hometown with my parents. My phone buzzed, and I expected it to just be another message from a friend or a family member. But I was wrong. I received a notification from PayPal, and again, it was £3. Only not from Eric this time, but from a girl whose name I didn't recognize at all. I opened up the PayPal app only to see a note attached to this payment that I had received. The note said, "Sending on behalf of Eric." When I tell you that my blood ran cold. I had just about forgotten all about this man, and all he had done to make me feel unsafe and unsettled, and yet here he was again, antagonizing me, yet this time doing it through other people. Perhaps this was his way of telling me that him being banned from talking to me himself won't stop him from entering my world. I threw my phone down on the couch and spent the night drinking with family until I forgot about the notification. I know that I probably should have told someone about it, but I just wanted to do as much as I could to block him out. I didn't want him to control me anymore, and I since haven't seen or heard anything from him, and I really wanted to stay that way. I think Eric still works at the shopping center, and he lives local to my parents. I avoid my old workplace so I don't have to see him, and he doesn't get to see me. All of my socials are private, and I don't answer calls from numbers that I don't know. I should have picked up these habits a long time ago, but apparently, I needed to learn the lesson that the more someone knows about you, the more they can use it against you. I've always been obsessive about locking my doors. Even as a kid, it was something I did. And as a teenager, I learned through experience that a locked door can make all the difference. It might not stop someone determined to get in, but it at least gives you some sort of warning. It's a habit everyone who knows me is aware of. At social gatherings, I'll lock doors behind me without even thinking, and I always hear someone ask, "Who the hell locked it?" Then I get that rush of embarrassment because, of course, it was me. I've done nightly lock checks for over a decade, and I don't think I can sleep without doing them. I only mention all of this because it explains how strange this situation has been for me. I moved here about 5 months ago from a much more populated part of my state. The house that I'm in sits far back from any paved road. 2 dirt roads and 2 private driveways separate me from civilization. My rental sits off to the side of another person's property, down their private drive, then onto my own. I've never seen a pedestrian out here. It's peaceful, secluded, and private. I think it's pretty hard to find even with a GPS. Most maps place it a few fields south of where it actually is. For someone like me who values privacy and hates unannounced visitors, it's perfect. The house is partly surrounded by trees and brush, with an open field on the other sides. It took time to adjust to the rural quiet, sounds of coyotes, the occasional cow screaming at night, the pitch-black darkness without any light pollution. But I got used to it. The nearest town is more than 20 miles away. Another quirk about me, I never sleep in a completely dark house. I always leave at least one light on in a common area, usually just one, but some sort of nightlight. My back door opens towards the trees, but it never felt particularly spooky. A few yards into the tree line, there's a 6-foot wire fence covered in vines, adding another layer of privacy. No one ever uses our back door. There's not really a reason to. A month after moving in, I accidentally locked myself out. I have this habit of locking the handle out of reflex, sometimes before I even realize whether I have my keys on me. I knew I'd only lock the handle, so I figured I could just pop it open. When I inspected it though, the door was pristine. It looked like a brand new door, no marks or scratches on it, and I didn't want to damage anything, so I swallowed my pride and called my landlord to let me back in. I promised myself that I'd just be more careful. About a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom door, and I instantly noticed that something was wrong. It was way too dark in the house. The light that I always leave on was off. I wondered if maybe the power had gone out, but I could still hear my fan running behind me, so no, it wasn't that. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, that's when I felt it. That prickling feeling on the back of my neck. The unmistakable sensation that I was being watched. One more step forward and it wasn't a feeling anymore. I was certain of it. I turned toward where I thought the source was, half expecting to see someone standing there. But instead, I saw stars. My back door was wide open. 2 quick steps backward, out of view, and now my pulse was racing. But my boys were asleep in the next room, and I couldn't just hide. So I stepped forward again, with every instinct screaming that someone was out there, just waiting for me. I reached toward the door, every nerve of mine braced for the touch of someone's hand. After a few seconds of fumbling, my fingers found the doorknob, and I slammed it shut. When I went to lock it, I realized that the deadbolt was still engaged. Maybe I thought that the latch just hadn't caught properly. That's possible. The light being off, that remained a mystery to me. My boys swore that they hadn't touched it, and I believed them. They like having the light on, especially at night. So I wrote it off as strange, in a way that I just couldn't explain it. From then on, every time I locked that door, I leaned my entire weight against it. Life went on after that night, and I tried to forget about it, until almost 3 weeks later. It started out the same way again. I woke up in the middle of the night, this time not due to thirst, a nightmare. I rarely dream, but sometimes I'll have these clusters of night terrors. I woke up gasping, mouth dry, heart pounding. After using the bathroom, I walked into the kitchen and there it was again. That same darkness, along with that same feeling of being watched. Again, the back door was wide open. I froze, then retreated a few steps, only to force myself forward again. I shut the door convinced that someone was going to grab me, but of course that didn't happen. When I checked it that morning, there were scratches and small dents around the lock. It was clear that someone had been trying to pry it open. I told myself that at the very least, it proved that it wasn't anything supernatural. But still, I didn't know exactly what to do then. 2 weeks later, I was half awake all night because the chickens out back were going nuts. That doesn't happen often, but when it does, it is insufferable. At around 2 a.m., my fan stopped. Power outage. I got up to light a few candles in the kitchen so nobody would stumble around in the dark. 2 steps in, and I knew before I'd even turned my head. That door was wide open again. I could hear the crickets outside, and they were far too clear for there to be a layer of wood between me and them. I shut the door again, heart racing, and I noticed even more damage around the lock. This wasn't in my head. This had never once happened during the day, only at night. I kept thinking about that, replaying it over and over. I remembered just how pristine the front and back doors were when I'd locked myself out that first month. It was obvious that someone was coming into our house, and they kept coming back. I decided then to swap the locks. The front door had a heavy square deadbolt, while the back door had a sloped one that looked like it had been installed backwards. I was going to fix it the next day. That night, though, I couldn't find my screwdriver, so I hung a Christmas decoration with little bells on the back door handle, almost as a makeshift alarm. The door being open had never happened 2 nights in a row, I told myself. I even thought about setting up a camera, but honestly, I was a bit scared of what it might catch. For once, I went to bed early. I fell asleep fast, and then the nightmares came on. I woke up first around midnight. Kitchen light off. Back door open. I shut it, locked it, went back to bed. I woke up again at 1:30 and the same thing. Door open again. Woke up at 3. Door was closed this time. Thank God. I fell back asleep, straight into another nightmare. Now, in this dream, I could hear Christmas bells. I walked into a dark room where a little girl stood facing away from me. At first, I wasn't afraid. I asked her name. She didn't answer directly. She started chanting, "Someone's coming. Someone's coming." Her voice grew louder and louder, rising with every repetition. The bells just kept ringing in the background. Finally, she turned around, her jaw hung open unnaturally wide, her mouth stretching down to her chest, and she screamed, "Someone's here." I woke up instantly. Dawn was just starting to break through my window, and my first thought, of course, was the door. Sure enough, the kitchen was dark and the door was wide open again. But this time I didn't feel that same sense of danger. It felt like whatever it was had passed. And that's when I saw the Christmas bells, no longer on the doorknob, but sitting neatly on top of the dryer a few steps away. The next morning, I asked my boys if they'd heard anything during the night. My 13-year-old said no at first, then added, "Actually, I got up at about 2:30 to pee. The back door was open, so I shut it." I asked about the bells, and he said that he was pretty sure they were still hanging on the handle when he went to bed. That same day, I finally got around to switching the locks. A few days later, I noticed that there were more scratches, fresh ones. But so far, the new lock is held, for now at least. Update. For those of you out there wanting a little bit more information about what's going on. It's been quiet here since we changed the locks. We hung up an outdoor security camera. It's not higher end, so it doesn't have audio, but the video works just fine. I haven't happened to notice any new scratches on the door. We're coming up on 2 weeks since the last incident, which has always been the usual interval between these openings, so I'm staying cautious. The camera stays on, and if our nighttime visitor shows up again, we'll finally be able to see them, assuming they don't dart off the second the door opens, or bust out our new outdoor light. For now, that's all I can really report. There's no answers and no real peace of mind over here, just quiet. And in a place like this, I'm still not sure whether that's comforting or not. I'm going to share the story of how I dated and fell in love with a sociopath. This is a hard story for me to tell, so please bear with me. I'm hoping that by sharing it, it'll help myself heal, and maybe some other victims too. You guys, we're not alone. The night that we met, this was supposed to be the night that I took my life. It was a cool fall evening, just warm enough for a light jacket. I was at a horse sale that I went to every month. Per usual, my friend and I checked out the tack lots and horses that were up for auction. Throughout the past few months, I had dealt with a lot of pain and hardship. My heart was as broken as it could be. All of my passion for the things that I once enjoyed was gone. The girl that I once knew wasn't there anymore. I walked that long, dark road of depression. I had no self-esteem anymore. I felt I was worth nothing. I planned on ending it all after the sale. I was watching horses in the outdoor ring when one caught my eye. My friend was looking for a horse, and it seemed like it might be a match for her. I slipped into the ring to talk to the owner. When he turned around and looked at me, it was as if the world stopped turning. The horses around me were in slow motion. Our eyes met and every bone in my body just went cold. I asked to try the horse out and he let me. Fast forward, my friend bought the horse. In the end, the horse didn't work out, but that's another story for another time. The owner was supposed to deliver the horse to them the next day. I didn't catch his name, and for whatever reason, I couldn't move forward with my plan that night. I laid in bed, but I couldn't sleep. Although the fact was, I was still here, and I had to find out who that guy was. The next day, I was out fishing on a river with my brother when my friend texted me the owner of that horse's name. Matt. She had written a check out to him, so it all worked out. It wasn't long before I had found him on Facebook, and it wasn't long before he messaged me, asking me out on a date. I don't think I'll ever forget that day. I spent the next week or so house sitting for an old high school friend. I invited him over for dinner towards the end of the week. I'd never been so nervous in my life, I honestly can tell you I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I made shrimp pasta and vodka sauce that night. We clicked. He ended up letting me take his truck out for a spin. When we got back to the house, we were sitting in the dark talking when he pulled me in for our first kiss. My heart just melted. I remember my eyes filling with tears because it all just felt so right. I swore for so long that it was right. He stayed with me until about 5 a.m. The guy was allergic to cats, otherwise he would have just stayed the entire night. The next few months seemed to be pure bliss. Everything was amazing. The money that he blew on spoiling me was just crazy. I got everything that I could have ever wanted. His family was loaded and he wasn't exactly afraid to show it. It wasn't until the honeymoon phase was over that I started noticing things. An ex-girlfriend repeatedly texted him and told him that he had given her chlamydia. He then gave it to me. In his eyes, I was never skinny enough. My hair was never the right color. I didn't have tattoos and I only had a few piercings. I was a waitress, I drove a truck, I posted too many selfies. He said that I texted him too much, that I wasn't able to satisfy him anymore. He began dropping me off at the gym to work out while he ran errands just about every day of the week. Matt became even more obsessed with porn than normal. A Tumblr blog, the whole 9 yards. He killed off all my hopes and dreams, one by one. If we were to be together, I could never ride racehorses for a living like I had wanted to my whole life. He started spending hours on end playing video games when I came over. He had used me for what he needed and he was done with me. He taught himself how to build computers. He started putting together guns in his basement and fabricating 3D parts for them. This should have been a red flag. About a month went by of him ignoring me. When he was talking to me, he'd tell me that I wasn't enough. And he'd show me pictures and videos of all the girls that he wanted. He told me that my family hated me. Everyone did. I became depressed again. I started working more and more hours just to keep myself away from thinking. One night, I finally had a full-on mental breakdown. I told him about the night we met, what I was supposed to have done that night, how I feel like he saved me and how much I loved him. His answer? He left me. The next morning, he woke up and texted me saying that he had no feelings for me and I could come get my things when I wanted. My world fell apart around me. I lost 25 pounds because I don't think that I ate for weeks. My parents became concerned for me and didn't let me close my door. My dad got me a job riding racehorses, and around then things started to look up. About a month later, I landed myself in the ICU with a severe concussion. When I woke up, I thought Matt and I were still together. I got on my phone to tell him I was hurt when I saw the messages from the breakup, and it caused me to fall apart all over again. An entire year passed. I remained single. Matt had a few girlfriends. I knew this from his social media pages. Somehow, I managed to keep myself together. At least, that's what I made it look like. I worked myself to death, bought a new car, and moved out at 20. I worked 2 jobs and about 75 hours a week. I kept myself busy. I had a personal cocktail of Adderall, alcohol, and weed that helped me keep myself afloat. I'll be the first to admit that the drinking did start to get a bit out of hand. I was at my parents' visiting when I got a friend request from Matt on Facebook. I must have refreshed the page 10 times. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Despite my better interest, I accepted it. He messaged me a little while later. He had made it through the police department and was now a county sheriff. He gave me a pretty lame apology, but I accepted it nonetheless. I knew in my heart that I wasn't over him. He took me to dinner that night and spent the night at my apartment. He actually made some good points about why he ended it with me. I started to forgive him. I shed a lot of tears that night. We started hanging out like old times again, but the same problems started to come up. Once again, I wasn't good enough, but there was something different about him this time. He had become obsessed with picking locks. We'd be laying in bed watching a movie and he'd be on his phone watching lock-picking videos. He complained about my dog a lot. He always joked that he'd go missing one day. A few more weeks went by and it seemed like every once in a while his mask would vanish, but just for a second. I should have known that something was off when he sent me a text complaining about somebody dying in his arms at work. The body stunk, he said. He started driving like a nut. I vividly remember us going 116 miles per hour on a back road in his Mustang. He watched my reactions the entire time, hardly looking at the road. We went to New York for a couple of days, and he brought a gun with him into the One World Trade Center, promptly getting us kicked out. We got into a fight over the phone one night because he called me an explicit name. The next day we met up to talk about it. During my drive to the meeting place, I was overwhelmed with this feeling of dread. I knew that it was the end of us, but it was much more than that. I wasn't sad, I was frustrated. We talked for about 20 minutes, and I don't think his eyes ever wandered from my face. He was staring right through me, basically. His two dark brown eyes shot through me like bullets. He started speaking to me through gritted teeth, telling me that no one would ever love me, that he was in cahoots with my friends and they all hated me too, how I was going nowhere in life. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. His eyes were completely dead. That's an image that I don't think I can ever unsee. The way he was looking at me gave me chills throughout my body. That's when the voice in my head started talking. Steph, get out of the car and get out now. Whether that was my brain or my gut, I don't know, but I got out. I hurried to my car, jumped in, and immediately locked the doors. I saw him staring at me through my rearview mirror, and I drove straight to my parents' house bawling. They were terrified on my behalf. The next day, my boss told me that Matt had apparently been driving back and forth past my job, going outrageous speeds, almost as if he was trying to show off. But the fact was that he lived almost an hour from there and had no reason to be at my place of business. I reported him to his precinct, who said that they would take care of it. And me having full faith in that statement, I guess they did. I didn't hear from Matt for a very long time. I started to move on in my life and feel like I was once again myself. Finally. I started dating my current boyfriend, who, for the record, is the best and the most loving man I've ever met in my life. Matt drunk texted me one night, though. I told him to leave me alone. I had since moved an hour away since we broke up, and I had only then started to feel safe again. Well, tonight, my boyfriend was on his way over when he called me to tell me that someone had been tailgating him for almost 30 miles. I don't have any evidence to prove this, but in my heart of hearts, I know that was Matt. Whether it was or it wasn't, the driver of a car turned down another road about a half mile from my house. Really settling to know that if it was my ex, he likely knows my exact address. And that's something that I have no clue what to do about. This happened to me a couple of months back now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to collect myself enough to really come to grips with the fact that it even happened to me. It's relevant for me to tell you up front that I'm a military vet, and I have PTSD and anxiety, as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my 3rd year of. I read that cognitive behavioral therapy can massively improve PTSD symptoms, and in turn help to reduce anxiety. So I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is, my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. A jock douchebag type who's a personal trainer, but he trains at home too, 'cause gains. The kind of guy whose only 2 topics of conversation are protein powder and steamed rice. I'm willing to bet you know the type. Anyway, with that being a constant issue at home, meditation and quiet mindfulness are just not possible with the constant noise. My solution to this was to do my normal routine during the day, but take full advantage of my insomnia later on. Around midnight of each night, I would put on my coat and shoes, and as we lived near the beach, I figured I could walk to the beach now that there's pretty much no people around. Walk on the sand and be mindful to the sounds of the ocean. Actually, sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? It was the first 2 times, but you know what they say, 3rd time's the charm. The walk to the beach from my home isn't that far, maybe a little over half a mile. But once I got there, I would walk to the very end of the beach, until you reach the cliffs where there's this World War II artillery gun turret, which was another half-mile-ish away. Sometimes I would walk the path up the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean, which was only ever broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt safe up there, knowing that I was alone, just me and the waters. Usually before I'd turn tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance of someone who also came and enjoyed the view, although I imagine they came during the day. The benches are close to an old pub that was shut down years ago, and I had heard the place used to get used as a dogging site or a brothel or something like that back in the day. So when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards the pub, I figured it was just some young lads trying to catch potential doggers at it. I sat on the beach and waited for the car to pass me, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by the headlamps. The headlights of the vehicle went off immediately, and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was fully alert and a wee bit cautious, so I dropped to one knee and ducked behind the bench, the one that I'd been sitting on. The vehicle drove past me. It was only maybe 40 feet away, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I could now see that it was this old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle, one with shitty camo painting on the sides. At that moment, someone popped out of the top of the vehicle with a scoped rifle and a giant torch. In that instant, in my head I was back in Iraq, and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped onto my belt buckle and crawled into a patch of long grass adjacent to the benches. Then I got in a position where I could see them, but they wouldn't be able to see me. The guy with the rifle shone his torch at the exact bench I'd been sitting on. Then the others, clearly searching for me. He started looking all around him through the scope, looking for where I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard I felt as if they would be able to hear it. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly, to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the benches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only is there a row of houses, but an old stone bus stop I could take hard cover behind if they saw me and decided to open fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in the long grass, it started to rain, and they were still obviously looking for me, but were now about 150 feet away. The guy with the rifle was scanning around with his eye down the scope, so I waited till he was looking away from me to seize my moment and run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet. Then I sprinted towards the bus stop, while throwing some zigs and zags in there just in case they had seen me. Luckily, they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take out my phone and call the authorities. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and as I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the gunner's vehicle and then took off after them. The officers in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down in sheets by now. They asked me if I was absolutely sure it was a rifle, and I told them yes, no doubt. The officers both looked at each other, and then one of them asked, "And what's exactly your experience with firearms?" I told them I was ex-Army and have seen my fair share of all kinds of firearms. They then asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which was a pretty fair question to be honest. I explained that, quite ironically, I was taking a mindfulness walk to ease my PTSD symptoms. They were satisfied with that explanation, if not somewhat amused, and told me that the armed response unit was en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind and make a statement, but the officers told me not to bother waiting around because they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call I made. And also, it was pissing down with rain, so I should just get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super weird, and my heart was still thumping hard inside my chest. I started to walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter buzzed overhead and settled over the area where I'd been sitting on the benches, with the searchlight going. It was right then that it hit me like a shotgun to the chest. That happened. That all was fucking real, and it was here. What the f... My head started swimming. My heart was pounding twice as hard now, and my legs felt like jelly. My lungs felt glitchy, like I couldn't properly breathe. I dropped to my knees, now crying in the street under pouring rain, the only light coming from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb. And there I was, gasping for breath, with all sorts of thoughts flashing in my head, thinking that if I had stayed still and I hadn't hunched behind the bench, if I had done any number of things differently or hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark in that cold, wet dirt, and my wife would be none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they know I'd have been there? I'd been there twice before, I suppose, but is that something that one could bank on? And it's not like there's animals to hunt out there beyond foxes. And even that raises the question of why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and a flashlight at midnight? Anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that that experience absolutely terrified me. I guess my army training helped me stay alert and to stay hidden, but I don't really know. I don't go on my midnight mindfulness walks anymore, and I still get the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. Update. So today, I made a call to the local PD to try and get an update on what had happened. After a quick description of what the initial incident was, the officer on the phone was able to find the incident report nearly right away. Basically, the first officers on the scene confirmed that they had seen the vehicle and they had gone off-road in pursuit. They said they had given chase over difficult terrain for as long as they were able to. Then the vehicle turned off all their lights and made an escape using the darkest cover. The armed response units were called in as a precaution and patrolled the entire area while the helicopter was dispatched in order to try and locate the vehicle with heat-sensing cameras. Both teams were unsuccessful in finding them, as by the time they had arrived on scene, the bad guys had gotten away. CCTV was also checked, but yielded absolutely nothing. I told her I was sorry if they felt that I had wasted their time, and that I guess I had overreacted on account of my PTSD. She told me that as far as they're concerned, I did the right thing. She also said that there had been a few isolated accounts of gunshots having been heard in the area over the last few years, so maybe rethink taking my walks so late at night. I didn't have the energy to explain why I used to wait until it was so late to go walking, but any advice about avoiding getting shot is good advice in my book. So instead, I just agreed with her and then ended the call. After I'd hung up, I just sat for a few minutes going over the whole thing in my head. I guess that it was most likely nothing when all is said and done, but if nothing else, it's taught me that being hypervigilant isn't always such a bad thing. So I'm a guy living in the UK. I'm from a small town in Wales, albeit not the tiny villages that most people seem to imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everyone some context. So my story started when I was around 15 years old. I was dating this girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually ride the train to hers and back, but this one night her family wasn't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was around 19 or 20 at the time. Pretty chill dude. The plan was for me to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mother, and the whole thing kind of got heated, and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay. This happened at about 2 a.m. I didn't want to call my own parents. I was worried about waking them up. My mother is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a half worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home around 4:30ish. So I walked down this weird concrete stretch just a bit above the beach. I'm not exactly sure what you would call this path, but I stopped after about half an hour of walking, as there's a public toilet which is kind of run down but also open 24 hours. But after the length of the walk and 3 bottles of Coca-Cola throughout the night, I was desperate. I was expecting the bathroom to be empty, or maybe have a homeless dude sleeping in it. I don't know, but whatever my expectations were, they were wrong. There was a guy using the urinal. This guy looked to be in his mid to late 50s, a little on the overweight side, but not extremely so. He had gray, messy-ish hair, but other than that, just looked like a regular guy. He he definitely didn't look homeless. I remember that he made a quick joke about something, although I don't remember what. I do remember politely laughing though, because far be it from me to make anybody willing to converse in a public restroom at 3 a.m. feel awkward in any sort of way. I did my business and left. Well, after about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather got pretty bad. It started to rain heavily, and the wind was beginning to pick up. I seem to remember that this was around November, so it was pretty cold out. So I'm walking, and this car drives by. It then beeps its horn at me and pulls over just in front of me. I'd assumed that it was somebody that I might know, but I couldn't think who might be out at this hour. I went over to the car, and it happened to be the dude from the toilet inside. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him. He said that was a long walk, and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, so he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I know that I should have refused, but the weather was bad, and at the time, he wasn't giving off any sort of weird vibes. The drive took about 15 minutes, maybe 20 at the most. But the longer I was in the car with him, the more I started to get those vibes that there was something off about this guy. He was telling me that his best friend was this 14-year-old lad who stays over at his house a lot. They drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully recall what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask to someone that you're giving a simple lift home to. Anyway, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I told him my house wasn't accessible by road, and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to give him a ring when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I got home okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point, through our conversation, he knew mine. He just said Pete. I said, Pete what? My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me though. He just kept saying, just call me Pete. I'd later learned that Pete was a fake name altogether. Anyway, about 10 minutes later, I got into my house and texted him, just to let him know that I was home safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then, I was full of bad decisions to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to go back to normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me a great day. I replied to the first few, and then began to ignore them, because that's weird, right? He then started to ring me, every single morning. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly call until I would answer. He was sending me these texts inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he'd just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story of a friend he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old that I was talking about, and accidentally let slip that the guy called him John. I collared him about this, said, but I thought your name was Pete. He said, oh no, my friend's name is John. I said, you just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom. He said, oh well, some people call me John. It's kind of like a nickname, but his name is John too. He hesitated saying this, and it kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing the offer, but he kept asking. After a while, my mom wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she called him herself, from her own phone, telling him that if he carried on texting and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew it. I just about always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon, and I'd play with her for about 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, right near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would notice that the car lights were left on and the engine was always running. I recognized the car. I would occasionally notice the car door open and a large flash from that direction as if someone were snapping pictures. I started to alter the time that I walk my dog, but he would eventually figure that out too and start showing up either earlier or later to coincide with when I was walking with her. This went on for months, and I never mentioned it to anyone. But one day, it all just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. I never saw his car anymore. No texts or phone calls from him. It all just came to a halt. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18 or 19 after my aforementioned dog passed. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my computer so that I always had them with me. I turned on my phone, which had been turned off for several years now, still having the old SIM in it. That's when I got the final message from Pete. It was a strange one, and was about 14 months old at the time. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over New Year, I was diagnosed with an illness, and I've been told that I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at XYZ address, and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so I can have one last chat with you. I've got some beers in the fridge, and if it gets too late, you can stay the night. Just drop me a call when you want to come around so that I can get everything in order. See you soon." I have no idea if Pete or John or whatever his name was genuinely ill, or if he was just trying to lure me over to his house. I never went to the address that he sent me. I never responded to him or heard from him since then. I know that this story might seem anticlimactic to some, but if you live through weirdness like that in a small community such as my own, it definitely sticks with you. I know now what I knew then though. Aside from getting in his car late that stormy night, I learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to be alone with this guy. The fact that he thought, or at least said, that we were friends is totally off base. I mean, why would a man in his 50s want a teenage friend, if not to do some really strange things to them? I might have been made of bad decisions back then, but I'm glad I only have a story to share because of them, instead of something far more terrifying. I'm a 34-year-old male, and a few years back, I had an extremely stressful week at work. So I decided on a whim that I'd book a cabin on Airbnb. Very last minute, same night. Me and my dog packed up, and I drove up about an hour and a half away. I stopped along the way and got a bottle of wine in a town about 30 minutes from the cabin. Then I went and grabbed food at a restaurant a mile down the road. Very small town vibes. I ended up getting to the cabin at around 7:45. Just enough light out to start a fire, which I did. The cabin was down a gravel road that was about a 5-minute drive from the main road. It was a pretty fucking secluded feeling, even though in comparison to some actually secluded spots, this one wasn't so. It was only about a 20-minute drive from the nearest gas station and civilization. There was no cell service near the cabin though. It stopped about a minute down the road in. I didn't mind that though, because it was nice to unplug and decompress. The reviews of the place were all great. It had electricity and a clean, updated bathroom, microwave and fridge. Nothing fancy, but again, clean and managed. It had a nice front porch to sit on, and there were windows on every wall of the building to see out into the woods around it. The driveway itself came up from the backside of the cabin and stopped completely alongside the right of it. My dog and I sat around the fire until about 11, maybe 11:30. I eventually put it out, head inside. Now I'm in bed with my dog just putzing around on the phone. The thing is, every few minutes, my dog keeps alerting me to noises that she's hearing outside. After the first few jolts, I found it annoying, but I just took it as the woods doing their thing. About 45 minutes into lying in bed, I hear this light knock at the door. To say that I was fucking terrified is the understatement of the year. My heart fucking dropped into my gut. I didn't immediately answer it, and I heard a light knock again about 30 seconds later. Now I found myself wondering if something is wrong with the Airbnb, and because there's no cell service, maybe the owner couldn't get to me? Did I not notice that the place was on fire? I don't know. And in this scenario, all of these ideas run through your head pretty fast. The door itself was solid and locked, but there was a window to the right of it that showed the porch. I turned the porch light on and peeked my head in the window, only to see a guy standing there. He didn't seem scary necessarily. He may have been drunk, but I couldn't quite call it. He also wasn't trying to smash down the door or screaming belligerently. The guy immediately saw me though. The windows were like mad old and pretty shitty, so I could tell that he'd be able to hear me even though it was closed. I said, "What do you want?" That's when he motioned his head toward the door, almost as if signifying he wanted to come into the cabin. I said, "Why?" with an attitude now, because who the fuck is this guy? Without taking a moment to think or even evaluate the situation any further, he says, "For sex." Now in my mind, I'm like, what? I immediately blurt out, "Yeah, man, that's not gonna happen, and you need to leave right now. I have a GPS cell phone, and I won't hesitate to call the cops." I didn't have a GPS phone, but I've always thought of myself as a fast thinker. I hoped it would scare him off, and he quickly turned around and left the porch. Now, the cabin was mostly one open room. I laid back down in the bed, heart still pounding. I didn't know if he was going to go get a gun or something to try to break in with. Directly across the bed from me is a window that looks out onto the driveway. I can see the running lights that turn on when your car doesn't have the lights actually on, and I could see them backing away from the property. I laid in bed in a fear-based state for about 3 to 4 minutes, honestly thinking of stuff that I had next to me that I could use as a weapon. It was COVID time, so I had rubbing alcohol and a lighter right there on my bedside table. My plan was, if this man got in somehow, I was going to light him on fire. I got up after a few minutes, went and pushed a dresser and chair in front of the door. The cabin was elevated, so I wasn't terribly worried about the windows, except for the one that opened to the porch. I laid back down in bed, lights off, fully terrified, and wide awake until the sun came up. That guy never came back. I packed up and left as soon as it was bright enough to see. Then I messaged the Airbnb owner as soon as I got cell service. They said that nothing like that had ever happened, and they even offered to help me file a police report. I didn't take them up on that because I live far away, and now that I had some distance from the situation, it felt as if it was likely a one-off thing. But I still have questions to this day. 1. How did he know I was there? All I can think is that he followed me from the small town that I'd stopped in about 20 minutes away. I am a gay man, but I'm not necessarily feminine presenting, although I suppose if you have the eye, you'd be able to tell. I'm assuming the locals must know there's an Airbnb out there too. And 2, how did he manage to get his car down that road so quietly and with no lights on? Is it possible that he pushed it the last bit down the driveway? Did I really not notice the running lights? It was pretty quiet except for woodland noises, and I didn't hear anyone pull up, no doors close, and I didn't hear anybody walk up to the cabin. This whole situation is one that I just wanted to leave behind me, but there are nights where all I can do is think about this odd encounter. I don't lose sleep over it now, but I did that one night, and if I'm being honest, I don't really find the tranquility and stillness of being in the woods very appealing anymore. I didn't realize I had buried this memory until recently, when something completely random brought it rushing back. And once it did, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is easily the most terrifying experience of my entire life, and I think it shaped the way I see the world more than I ever understood. The trigger came from a TV show. A few months back, I was watching the first season of The Sinner. If you've seen it, you probably remember the opening. The main character suddenly snaps and starts violently stabbing a man. This all happens in the first couple minutes of the show, so I don't feel as if I'm spoiling anything here. But the moment that I saw that scene, my stomach dropped. I'm a huge horror fan. I'm the kind of person who can watch the goriest, most disturbing movies without even blinking. Yet that one scene hit me in a way nothing else ever had. I felt sick. A few episodes later, I had to stop watching entirely. I was at a friend's house and started feeling trapped, panicky. I made up an excuse to go home, but that feeling stuck with me for days. And because I'm the kind of person who can't leave things unexplained, I started digging into why it affected me so badly. I kept replaying that scene over and over in my head, and then out of nowhere, I remembered. This story happened when I was 11 years old. Back in 2004, my mom was working as a paralegal at a family law firm. One night, she needed to grab some case files from the office. This wasn't exactly unusual. Things in the legal world have a tendency to come up last minute. It was around 7 p.m. when she asked me to come along for the ride. I remember thinking it was a bit late, but it wasn't a big deal to me. We lived in a really nice area, a quiet, safe neighborhood where nothing bad ever really happened. I bring that up because what happened next didn't feel like something that could happen where we lived. When we pulled into the office parking lot, my mom didn't get out of the car right away. I was in the backseat reading, typical only child stuff, and I barely noticed. But after a few minutes, I asked her why we were just sitting there. She said quietly that when we pulled in, there was a man walking away from the building who walked to his car parked right behind us. He then started his car, turned the lights on, but he didn't pull out. He's just sitting there, waiting. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were on a call. Maybe they just finished their own legal meeting. They didn't seem threatening, but my mom had a feeling, so we waited. 5 minutes goes by, then 10. The man's headlights were still on, shining directly into our car. My mom kept glancing into the rearview mirror. And finally, she turned to me and said, "Let's just go get the files and get out of there fast." Okay, here we go. We got out and started walking quickly toward the building. I didn't realize it in the moment, but that man got out of his car and started to follow us in. My mom told me to hurry because it was, quote, freezing, her code. We jogged the last few steps to the door, and the building required a key card to enter, so she swiped hers and we went inside. I think we both felt safer once the door locked behind us. But within seconds, that man flashed his own security card and he followed us inside. My mom would later tell me that 1,000 thoughts ran through her head all at once. Maybe this guy worked there. Maybe he was some sort of client. The building sometimes hosted late-night mediation sessions, and clients were often given temporary key cards to enter after hours. So there was a chance that he had a legitimate reason to be there. But still, she felt that something was off. The moment we made it into the building, my mom started mashing the elevator button to get it to come down for us. Unfortunately, it didn't come down before that man made his way over to us, where he waited for the elevator as well. As we're standing in front of the elevator doors, this man smiled. It was kind of this overly wide, forced smile, one that didn't exactly reach his eyes, but he didn't say a word. When the elevator finally arrived, he stepped inside first and held the door open for us, obviously waiting for us to enter. That's when my quick-thinking mother made her move. She pretended to get a phone call. She put her hand up like she needed a second, then politely smiled and said, "Oh, I need to take this. We'll grab the next one. Thank you, though." Then she gently pushed me aside as the doors closed. The moment the elevator began moving, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "There's no way we were getting in that elevator with him." I could tell from her voice that this wasn't paranoia, that she was dead serious about something. My mom wasn't going to ignore that sketchy feeling she got from this guy. So when the next elevator came down, she looked up at the display above it to make sure that the man didn't go to the same floor that we were going to. He went to 3. My mom's office is on 2. She said that we're going up, going into the office, and we'll wait there for a bit. We did just that. We rode the elevator to the 2nd floor, got off, went to her office, and locked the door behind us. We waited there 10 minutes, maybe longer, and neither of us said a word. During that time, my mom often had her ear pressed up against the door, clearly listening for any indication that there was somebody outside in the hallway. Then, when everything seemed clear, my mom opened the door, peeked into the hallway, and we made our way back downstairs, this time using the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. Once we made it to the stairs, the only sounds we heard were our footsteps going down those concrete steps. We made our way out the side door of the building and sprinted to our car. That was it, at least for me. That night I went home thinking my mom had just been overly cautious. But years later, as a teenager, I'd ask her about that night again, and that's when she told me what actually happened. That man from the elevator had been in the building earlier that evening for a divorce and custody mediation session with his estranged wife. He didn't want the divorce. He was pushing for her to dismiss it, and apparently the session had gone badly. He stormed out halfway through after refusing to sign the custody papers. His wife, who was seemingly freaked out by his actions, decided to wait for about half an hour in the building before leaving, just to make sure that he was gone. While she waited inside, he went back to his car and sat there sobbing. That was around the time that we arrived, pulling into the parking lot as he got back into his car. According to the court records, while sitting there, the guy began doing drugs, and that was the first step towards what would happen next. Eventually, he grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors from his glove compartment. He got out and walked back towards the building. Once again, roughly at the same time as my mother and me. He followed us in. The elevator that he invited us into took him to the 3rd floor. That was where the mediation session had taken place, and ultimately where he decided to stalk his wife. When she finally left the meeting room and went to make her way towards the elevator, that's when he ambushed her. He would ultimately stab her 106 times with those scissors. The mediator from that session would actually turn into a witness at this man's trial. She had left the meeting room at roughly the same time as the wife, but instead of going to the elevator, the mediator went the opposite way down the hall towards her husband's office. He just so happened to work on the same floor. But while walking, she heard the wife scream out her name, followed by, "It's him." When the mediator ran towards the sounds of the screams, she saw the man dragging his bloody wife into the elevator. As she got closer, he resumed his attack, plunging those scissors into his wife over and over again, now right in front of the mediator's eye. There was blood everywhere, and the wife was no longer moving. When the police finally arrived, they found him still holding her body, his arm wrapped around her neck, as he choked his now deceased wife. This all happened while we were still in the building. We just didn't hear it. I believe by this point, we were already making our way down the stairwell, which, unless those sounds were coming from inside it, you weren't going to hear it through the concrete walls. Even now, this is something I can't stop thinking about. What could have happened if we stepped into that elevator? Would he have left us alone? Probably. I mean, his rage was directed at his wife, not at us. But the guy was high on meth, completely gone. Who's to say what might have set him off in that situation? My mom's quick thinking and her gut instinct kept us out of danger that night. She didn't try to rationalize this guy's weird behavior or try to be polite through it. She trusted her intuition, and that's the biggest thing I've learned from her. Women are constantly told not to overreact, not to make a scene, not to be rude. But my mom didn't care if she seemed rude that night. She cared about keeping us alive. I still think about that man's face, the way he smiled, and the way that he went on to do something so horrific just moments later. And every time I picture that elevator door closing, I think about just how close we came to potentially never making it home that night. I know I'm just a stranger on the internet posting a story to Reddit, but these types of stories hit far differently when you consider there are real people behind them. If you're interested in the media coverage and what happened during the trial, I'll leave some links in the description. Be warned though, the details are graphic and hard to get through. I encourage you to use your own discretion. This happened toward the end of 2017, maybe even the beginning of 2018. The only thing that I didn't write down from that night is the date, but everything else, I remember. It was a Thursday. Normal doesn't describe any aspect of my life, so I wouldn't say it was a normal Thursday at work. Just like any other, it wasn't. Well, it was in some cases, but we actually had some really important people in the building that day, so it was actually sort of exciting. I work with people with varying disabilities. I'm part of a national organization that promotes the rights for people with disabilities. So, since I was 11, I'd been hearing stories about the first members of this organization, and old members who'd done so much to fight for the rights that people have now. Those are people I'd grown up really admiring for all their hard work. I'd noticed this guy come into the building probably about 10 or 15 minutes before he started talking to me. The office building itself was one floor, so it was accessible, and therefore had a pretty open layout. All the desks and workstations were out in the open, except for a few of the managers' and bosses' offices. I'd recognized the guy after a few minutes, but I wasn't quite sure from where exactly. I was standing and talking to some important members of the community when he came over and got my attention. At first, I thought he just wanted to get his turn to talk to the people that I was in the middle of chatting with, but it soon became apparent that he wanted to talk to me instead. He said, "Hey, you look really familiar. Have we met before?" Being pretty used to this line of questioning, I responded with, "Oh, you know what? I used to spend time here as a kid. That could be it." "Oh yeah, must be. My name's Paul, by the way." He started asking me what I remembered about being a kid in such an interesting and colorful environment, to which I easily answered his questions, especially after he'd introduced himself. I recognized his name immediately from stories told by old friends and coworkers, but couldn't remember if he was someone I should be associating with or not. Sometimes my coworkers, who mostly really looked out for me, would warn me to stay away from certain people, but I really couldn't recall if he was one of those people or not. After about 20 minutes of chatting, I went back to work at my desk in one of the more secluded corners of the office. Originally, I'd really liked that aspect about it. Pretty soon, though, I would come to really resent its positioning. Anyway, I'd gotten back to work, entering data into our database and other various tasks that I had to get done before the end of the day. I was so focused that I didn't really notice that everyone had started leaving, and the office had emptied out a lot sooner than normal. It wasn't actually unusual for that to happen at around 2:30 on a Thursday afternoon, but I'd really gotten used to having close friends around that always had my back. At this point, some of the people that I was closest to had left the organization, and I'd started to feel, well, far less safe than I had previously. So there I was, minding my own business, when all of a sudden, Paul was leaning against the wall next to my desk, just staring at me. "Hey, I really enjoyed our conversation earlier. Do you remember?" He started asking me if I remembered some mutual acquaintances, which I did. I really should have tried to get up and head to the back, where I could be around one of my coworkers, who'd been like another mom to me growing up. But Paul had seemed kind of harmless up until this point. Everything was fine at first. Then things took a turn. Paul said, "You know, when I first saw you, I was captured by your beauty." "Oh, thanks." I was feeling pretty awkward at that point, but I didn't want to be rude. "Truthfully, I only sort of recognized you. But wow, you've really grown into such a gorgeous young lady." He sat down in one of the chairs by my desk, where clients would usually sit. He scooted it closer to me, and I scooted as close as I could to the wall, trying to put just a little distance between us as I looked around. There was nobody else in the immediate vicinity, which most likely meant everyone else was either in a meeting or had gone home for the day, except for our receptionist, who, this is not a joke, was blind. Since the alarm bells were going off in my head, I said, "Hey, Paul, I need to get back to work soon." I wanted to be polite because he really hadn't done anything wrong. I just got this super strange vibe from him all of a sudden. "Okay, sure, I understand. But just let me ask you this one thing." He started asking me work-related questions about affordable housing, which is something I tend to have some knowledge about. He got himself comfortable while we started having a more productive conversation, before he completely took it off the rails. I just moved back from Kansas recently. He'd already said that 2 or 3 times during our conversation. Yeah, I think you might have mentioned that. I think I'm going to go back soon. He lightly set his hand on my knee while he talked, and I scooted it away so his hand fell off. Please don't touch me. I try to be polite, but I absolutely hate being touched by people that I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just, you remind me so much of my daughter. I used to be so close with her, but we don't talk much anymore. That's her mother's fault. I'm sorry to hear that, I told him flatly. At this point, I really just wanted him to leave me alone. You have no idea. It's been such a hard few months. He put his hand on my knee again, and that time, I pushed him away. Please don't touch me. I don't like that. Oh, I know, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting. Then he reached up to touch my hair. I have really long hair, and even though I hate it almost more than anything else, people tend to touch it without asking, so that's not that uncommon. Your hair is just so stunning. Paul, I told you don't touch me. I really don't want to ask you again. Now, normally, any one of my guy coworkers would have come over and saved me. It's what always happened. I could just look over at one of them from across the room and they'd immediately start yelling at the offending person to leave me alone, or they'd be asked to leave. I had 3 masculine coworkers who'd been known to do that for me without any question. Except this one instance, because none of them were there that day. I started to stand up, trying to skirt around Paul and find one of my other coworkers, or anyone really, that could have had my back, or just been a witness to the weird things that this creep was saying. Unfortunately, Paul stood up too. He wouldn't let me move around him. He had me trapped in my once safe little corner, conveniently out of the way of any cameras or anyone who could have seen what he was doing. Where are you going? He practically demanded. I have to pee. I straight up lied through my teeth, planning on hiding in the bathroom for the rest of the day, honestly. I never got the chance, though. No, our conversation was just getting good. You can't leave right now. But I really have to. Paul reached out and started touching my hair again. He had me backed up into the corner. This guy was a lot taller than me, so I couldn't get around his lanky arms. I really want to take you back to Kansas with me. No. At this point, I was really starting to get scared. He'd completely stopped trying to hide any of his creepiness. But we'd have such a good time together. I'm not that much older than you. Actually, he was already well into his 50s. I was 24 when this happened. I have a boyfriend, and I'd never leave this state. I'm sure your bosses wouldn't mind. We could build a good life together. No. I couldn't come up with a reason to try to get around him fast enough, so I just ducked under his arm and sat down behind the computer. I woke it up and pretended to get back to something that I was working on, but really, I sent an SOS message through Google Chat to my manager, Amy, asking for her help. I wasn't even sure if she was at her desk, but I sent it anyway and closed out the chat box, all while he was trying to look over my shoulder. I was nervous about keeping my back to him, but I really needed to get that message out. Once I was facing away from him, he started to play with my hair again, now touching my shoulders. He leaned in close and he started whispering in my ear. If you don't come with me willingly, I might just have to kidnap you and take you there. When you're alone and least expected, that's when it'll happen. To be fair, he could have been joking. I'm really not sure, but I wasn't about to treat it like it was a joke. Plus, he'd sounded pretty damn serious to me. It was at that moment that my manager just happened to walk by. Unbeknownst to me, she hadn't seen the message that I'd sent her, having just gotten out of a meeting herself. But she must have noticed that panicked look on my face. Or maybe she was completely oblivious to it all, and actually did need my help. Hey, if I can bother you for a second, I need your help with something in my office. No sooner than her request left her lips, I immediately grabbed my phone and bolted around Paul, making a beeline towards my manager, even going so far as to speed walk in front of her, so she was between me and him. We made it to her office. I thought for sure that she'd close the door and I could tell her what happened. But instead, Paul followed us, and she let him. My heart was still pounding, and I was really trying to hold my shit together. But Amy let Paul into her office while I was doing some random filing, and he continued exactly what he was doing when we were alone. He came up behind me and started playing with my hair, all while talking to Amy. I moved away from him to the other side of her office, but he kept trying to get close to me. Disappointingly, Amy did nothing to keep his grubby hands from touching my shoulders and my hair, despite me telling him several times in front of her to please stop. He even asked her if she would mind if I took a little vacation for a while, to which she answered that no, she didn't mind at all. I'm not sure if she was tired or busy or had other things on her mind, but it didn't seem like she noticed how uncomfortable Paul was making me feel. Even after I moved behind her so she and her desk were between me and him, all while I continued filing things. All of a sudden, Amy made an announcement that struck fear into my heart. "Paul, I have to get going now, so you're going to have to leave my office and go find someone else to chat with, okay?" I stared at her like she had grown a second and even third head. Everyone else in the building except the department heads had gone home for the day, and they were all in meetings. Was she seriously about to leave me and Paul alone? I was still scheduled to be there for another hour and a half. It took a few minutes, but Amy finally got Paul to leave her office, while I hung around as she gathered her shit. "Are you really leaving? I can't be alone with that guy." "Yeah, I sort of saw. He was being weird, right?" "Okay, so she did see it too." I wanted to ask her why she didn't stop it, but she was in a big rush to leave. "Amy, if you're leaving, can I please go home too?" I swear my eyes probably filled with tears because I was seriously about to start crying. Mostly, I was just nervous as hell. My manager seemed to notice for the first time, and she nodded her head. "Yeah, go ahead. Do you think you could stay until I pack my stuff up, and then walk out with me?" Amy huffed a little, looking exasperated by the simple conversation we were having. "Honestly, I really have to get going. I have an appointment I can't be late to." "Oh, okay. See you tomorrow then." I didn't push the issue. Instead, I followed her out of her office and hurried to grab all my crap. I don't even think I properly shut down my computer. I was in that big of a hurry. But I didn't actually see Paul again until right as I was rushing out of the building gates. Paranoid, I looked around and there he was, about 20 yards behind me, undoubtedly following me. I knew for sure after I'd made a couple of turns, and he didn't keep going straight. Seeing a crosswalk sign slowly counting down to the end, I made a dash across the street. Paul got caught at that traffic light. On the other side, breathing heavily, I called my mom so I could tell her what had happened. I was hoping that she would have motherly words to calm me down. But instead, she told me that it was my fault, and I should have told him off right away. She said if I was more assertive, then creeps like that wouldn't bother me as much as they had in the past. She spent the next 20 minutes chastising me about it, about how I needed to be better about standing up for myself, even against men twice my size. Part of me really believed that was true, and part of me still does. The next day, I told one of my coworkers, Nora, who'd been around a long time, what had happened, and she flipped out on Paul when she saw him next. She even threatened his life a few times, which I wouldn't put it past her to take. Honestly, Nora is a terrifying woman. She also demanded that he apologize to me. I would have been happy to never see the guy again, but as per her wishes a few weeks later, he came up to apologize to me while she was standing a few yards away. He said that he was sorry all sweetly, but as soon as Nora was distracted, he bent down and whispered a promise into my ear. "I'm still coming for you." I jumped away from him, made my way into the bathroom and locked myself inside until I was absolutely sure he was gone. I told Nora later, and she said that she would take care of it. I'm still not sure what she did, but I never saw or heard from Paul again. The day after that very first incident, I told 2 other managers, including the one who'd done next to nothing to help me out, the operations guy as well as the HR girl, but all of them seemed mostly uninterested. so the incident just became another weird story that I'd sometimes tell if the topic ever arose of creepy clients. I never really shied away from talking about it, or tried to hide it from anyone. It was just a thing that had happened. Eventually, I moved on. Except that a few months later, the HR girl, Callie, asked me to go on a private walk with her around the neighborhood where our building was located, so we could talk about something important. She kept saying that it wasn't anything bad, and that I surely wasn't in any trouble. But when we were far enough from potentially prying ears, she asked me about what happened with Paul. I told this girl every little detail. She apologized profusely that no one did anything at the time. She acknowledged that I'd been ignored by the management staff and that no one had really stepped up to protect me from such a traumatizing situation. Those were her words. Then she asked if I wanted to press charges. I told her I didn't really see the point, as it had seriously been months since it happened, and he'd only come back once or twice since. Actually, I'd never seen him again after the day he'd tried to apologize to me. But even so, it became a big deal, like out of the blue. The director of our entire organization dragged me into her office and offered me trauma counseling and asked me to identify a picture of the guy so everyone could be on the lookout. Apparently, after 4 months of silence, they were intent on making sure that I felt safe again. All the bosses kept saying that we should speak up immediately if we ever felt threatened, whenever we had a meeting in the next several weeks that followed. They asked me if I would mind if they announced to everyone on staff that Paul was banned from our organization, and if I would mind their alluding to the reason. I said that I didn't care because I didn't. Mostly, I just thought it was interesting that no one gave a shit until months after it would have done any good. It always kind of seemed to me like it got brought up in an executive meeting or something, and someone must have mentioned something about the potential for a lawsuit or some like that, and they were just trying to CTA, which seemed fine, as long as they started looking after other employees to keep everyone safe. Only that didn't happen. While I loved the work that I was doing, I only lasted with this organization another few months. They talked a big game about revamping protocols and identifying people that may have caused issues for the staff. But nothing changed. And after having a couple more run-ins similar to that with Paul, I realized nothing would come of this. I ended up walking out one day for lunch and just not going back. Never answered any call from my boss or HR after that. Just a single email asking them to drop my final check in the mail. And that was that. It's been about 7 years since I walked out of that office for good. Not a day goes by that I don't think back on that decision and smile for making the right choice to protect myself. After all, someone had to. This story has taken place over the last 3 months, having ended less than a month ago. And in the final 2 weeks, things took a dramatic turn, something that I'm still trying to fully process. About 3 months back, my roommate Chloe and I moved into a perfect apartment in a 6-unit building on a street that we immediately fell in love with. Chloe and I are both women in our early 20s. We both moved from a small town to a major city in the last 5 years, so we felt like real adults living in this space. Within the first couple of weeks in our new place, we began to suspect that we were living in close proximity to an ongoing domestic dispute between the tenants in the unit upstairs from us. At this point, we hadn't seen or met them, so we really had no idea the context of the relationship. A man's loud, angry ranting with no shortage of aggressively insulting comments, responded to by inaudible mumbles, prompted us to think that a woman may be in a potentially violent environment. Chloe and I decided that we would try to listen in case things ever escalated too far, and maybe try to offer the woman help in the meantime. That is, if we ever met her. Over the next 6 weeks, we continued to hear him, but we hadn't seen anyone and there were no real developments. When he was really loud, we had tried to record him on our phones. One Sunday afternoon, I was home alone cleaning up my kitchen, which was at the back of our unit. The man upstairs was having a very loud and long rant, and for the first time, I heard a clear response. I could make out a woman's voice telling him to shut up and to leave her alone. in an almost annoyed yet still fearful tone. He didn't appreciate that and began yelling at her, which eventually led to him banging something against his floor. This bang came with so much force that my kitchen lights began to flicker, and I could see specks of debris falling from my ceiling. This freaked me out, and I called my boyfriend Ted. When Ted answered, I whispered into the phone, "Don't say anything, just listen." The man upstairs continued to yell, but it wasn't until there was another bang that Ted could hear. I said into the phone, "That's my upstairs neighbor. He's been going on like this for hours. I've been trying to record some of it." Now, here's where the story really takes a turn. Considering how clearly we could hear him upstairs, it makes sense that he could make out what was being said below him. All 6 units were connected by a stairway outside at the back of the building, and I heard very loud steps running down them. Next thing I know, there are 3 heavy raps on my back door, accompanied by an angry, "So you can record my conversations, but you're not going to answer the fucking door?" I was instantly paralyzed and worried that this man would come by the open window where I was standing. After about 20 seconds, I heard the steps return upstairs and that familiar voice call out, "No one's home." I collected myself from the initial shock and fear of what just happened and cautiously left my apartment to make some calls. I decided to phone my landlord first, as he seemed like he would want to know if we were having issues with another tenant, and I was pretty confused about what was going on. I told him the chronology of events since moving in, and he provided me with some very interesting information. The tenants above us were a mother and son, Rita and Ivan. Ivan is 36, and he and his mom had been living in the building for about 10 years. During that time, Ivan had never had a job, and in the last couple of years had caused some problems for the landlord. Specifically, Ivan and the previous tenant of our unit, who had moved out over a year ago, had butted heads several times, which was why the landlord had decided not to mention anything to us. He knew Ivan had issues, but assumed that it was an isolated or contained incident. The last thing the landlord told me was that while the previous tenant was in our unit, Ivan had approached her and accused her of installing something in his wall to listen to him. Now, maybe I'm just dense, but this didn't set off immediate alarms that something more serious was going on with Ivan. I was still believing the woman's voice I heard belonged to someone in danger. So I called the city's non-emergency police line, who sent a car over to make sure that she was safe. They deemed that she was, and they promptly left. After our call, the landlord began to build a case to evict my upstairs neighbors, on the grounds that they were impeding on other tenants' ability to enjoy their space. Things upstairs had been mostly quiet for a couple of days, until I was in touch with the landlord again over the phone. He gave me more information, specifically that he believed when Ivan was ranting, it was directed towards the previous occupant of our unit, rather than at his mother. This obviously seemed odd to me, but we were still trying to piece everything together, so we had to keep an open mind. The landlord also reiterated how Ivan had really changed in the past couple of years, and before that point had caused no problems. His reasoning for not giving us a heads up before moving in was that since the last tenant had moved out, he had been quiet and more or less kept to himself. In the days after this call, the ranting started up again as we waited for an update on the eviction process. That Friday, we received confirmation that Rita and Ivan had been served with their first warning of eviction, so we expected to hear some action. Sure enough, that night while I was in bed, I heard Ivan's voice from above my bedroom. "Shh, I'm trying to listen." At this point, I'm definitely concerned, but really had no idea where this was going and how quickly it was escalating. The next evening, Chloe called me while I was at work to tell me that she thought she had heard someone trying to get in through our back door. I told her that I wouldn't be home for a couple of hours, but if she was concerned, I could leave early and she should call the non-emergency line. Chloe told me that she was going to see if anything happened and that she'd be okay. At around 10 p.m., I came home, and by midnight, I was the one on the phone with the non-emergency line, because Ivan had come downstairs to my back window where I was standing, asking us to leave him alone because we were apparently harassing him. Chloe and I had been in our kitchen talking about our days, having agreed that we were going to try to live our lives despite the situation. At one point, the subject of upstairs briefly came up, and the next thing I knew, the man that I had only ever physically seen once, with long, dark, greasy hair and a look of emptiness in his eyes, was standing at my back window next to where I was. My immediate response was to pull out my phone and start recording him. "Yeah, you can record me," he said, "but can you leave me alone? You and your friends harass me in my home every day." This got my adrenaline going, and as he walked off, I heard myself call back, "Bye, Ivan." I then called the police, and we waited for them to arrive. When he went back upstairs, he started yelling and ranting to Rita, and said some very weird and unsettling things. He said that we were sexually harassing him, and that us, the landlord, and the previous tenant were all in cahoots. He then mentioned the bat that we have beside our back door, which he wouldn't have been able to see at the window. How he knew we had it back there, I still don't know. He also knew my name, having only ever seen me once. The police arrived and essentially told us that there wasn't really anything they could do. They knocked on Ivan and Rita's door, but no one answered, and there was nothing but silence coming from the other side. The officers advised us to go to the station the following day and have a specific officer assigned to check in on us and monitor everything that was going on. They left, and I called my boyfriend to come and stay over for the night. In the hour after the police left, Ivan ranted sporadically, repeating much of the same things that we had been hearing in the past week. Ted came over, he heard for himself what was going on and agreed that it was odd. Banging came from upstairs, and Ted said that he was going out back for a smoke, and that if Ivan came outside, to call 911. Ted had injured his back the previous week and was concerned Ivan was going to try to come downstairs again, so he brought the baseball bat with him for the smoke. Well, minutes later, Ivan was now outside and standing at the top of his stairs, yelling that he was going to knock us out. He started to make his way down the stairs when Ted picked up the bat and told Ivan to stay where he was. I called 911, and another one of our neighbors came outside to help us, having heard the commotion. The police arrived, and I experienced some of the saddest minutes of my life. For starters, when the police went upstairs this time, Rita answered, and she completely defended her son. The woman we had initially been concerned was at the receiving end of domestic abuse told the officers that we were the ones not leaving her son alone, and that he had almost been attacked by my boyfriend. The police once again said there was nothing they could do, and left us for what felt like bait in order for our concerns to be taken seriously. They left. We heard Ivan amp up again, this time saying that he was going to kill those fucking bitches downstairs. So we packed up and left for the night, each staying with a friend. That was a tough night, as we both came to realize this apartment we had thought was so perfect had a pretty fatal flaw. We also had no idea how this was going to end. We met up the following day, and after encouragement from our families, we went to the police station needing real help with a potentially dangerous situation. It was eventually arranged that charges were to be placed on Ivan for uttering death threats. Chloe and I each gave a testimony, and the officers told us they would be going to the apartment to arrest Ivan. They advised us not to stay there for the night, if possible, just in case they couldn't locate him or were unable to get to him. At this point, they seemed to think that things could escalate. Without a warrant to forcefully make their way into Rita and Ivan's apartment, they had no way of making their way inside if Ivan or his mother didn't open the door. But I had a feeling that he would, since I had heard him at one point mention that he was the one protecting their home. Sure enough, when the police came to the building while we packed up our overnight bags, Ivan opened up his door, and they were able to take him away, despite his mother's protests, which included accusing us of lying and threatening them. We packed up our things, watched him get taken away, and we left, never spending another night in our perfect apartment. Since all of this, there have been a few updates. First of all, we moved, and our landlord was very generous in his reimbursement to us, having known Ivan had issues that he greatly underestimated. Aside from not wanting to be sued, I really believe our landlord to be a good guy who just made a judgment call that went completely wrong. We've received a few updates on legal proceedings, both from the charges that were pressed and the landlord's eviction process of Rita and Ivan. Ivan was released the following day on bail with a number of conditions, and we're waiting for a court date, I guess. Landlord is also waiting for a court date, having filed all the requisite documents to kick them out. The final piece to this completely bizarre sequence of events was from the Facebook profile that we found, having looked Ivan up on a whim. Ivan hadn't posted in 3 years, which lined up with the timeline of when the landlord said he began causing problems. He had made some weird posts that we provided to the police, in addition to frequent mention of a relationship that he was in. He has dozens of posts about this person, never naming them, nor did any of the posts have any responses, including likes or comments. It seems as if these posts were made towards an anonymous person, one who had no interactions with the posts themselves, nor did anyone else. Given all of this, it seems as if Ivan was in the midst of what was a several years long break from reality. Clearly, he had something going on in his head, and I don't think it would have mattered if we were perfect neighbors. I think we still would have eventually gotten on his bad side for something real or likely perceived. I'm going to testify in court when I'm notified to, but I pray that will be the last time that I'll ever come face to face with Ivan. This happened to me a little while back. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I work as a physical therapist who visits mostly elderly patients in their homes to give them treatment, rehabilitation services, things of that sort. I had been seeing one of my patients named Lynn, an 82-year-old female, every week for around 3 months without issue. Each week, I would arrive at the government housing apartment Lynn lived in, sign in with the security guards at the front desk, and then take the elevator up to her floor. Lynn lived with a friend of hers, a man named Peter, around 65, male, and both of them spoke Mandarin with very limited English. For reference, I don't speak Mandarin, so I used an interpreter for the first few appointments, and then communication was basic, and we got by with general, limited small talk and demonstrations of the exercises that I needed Lynn to do. Usually, Lynn would be the one to answer the door when I'd arrive, and I would not typically see Peter at all. He would either be out or in his own bedroom. But on this day when the door opened, I was surprised to see that it was Peter greeting me. Peter told me that Lynn was in the bathroom and shouldn't be long, that I should come inside and get set up while I wait for her to be ready. This didn't raise any alarm bells, as like I said, I had been seeing Lynn for months without any concerns. Peter went back to his bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room to set up the equipment for our session. After I'd finished setting up, I sat down and began waiting for Lynn to finish up in the bathroom. After only a minute or so, Peter came back out of his bedroom and began excitedly talking to me in Mandarin. I politely tried to explain that I didn't understand what he was saying, as I don't speak the language. He then got out his phone and pulled up a translating app, which would translate words spoken into the microphone in one language and spit out text in another language. For ease of telling the story, I'll recount it as if we were speaking directly to each other. However, for context, keep in mind this was all translated through this app. Peter, straight out of the gate, asked me, "Do you do massage?" This slightly alarmed me, mostly because I'm super paranoid and watch way too many true crime documentaries and thrillers, so I immediately thought that it was suspect. But equally, I am a physical therapist, so the question could have been perfectly valid. I thought he was most likely asking on behalf of Lynn, and that maybe she wanted to have some massage alongside her exercises, which is quite normal with a lot of my patients. So I told him, yes, I do. This immediately turned out to be a mistake, as Peter then told me, "Perfect. My brother and I have just opened a massage shop, and I'd like for you to work for me." I politely declined this offer, saying I was happy with my current job and not looking for any more work. Peter then insisted and said I was a beautiful girl and I'd be perfect for the job. I kept declining, tried to stay as polite as possible, but this badgering continued for about 10 minutes. It seemed like he wasn't going to take no for an answer, and I began to feel extremely uncomfortable. It got to the point where I played it off as if the translations didn't make sense, and I couldn't understand what he was saying, and was praying that my patient would just come out of the bathroom already. That way this interaction would end. Finally, Lynn did come out, and for a second, I felt this immense sense of relief, thinking, great, we can start our session now and this man will leave me alone. That relief was short-lived though, as she immediately asked me if I was going to work in the massage shop. I told her no, I'm not, and gave her the same spiel that I gave Peter over and over again. They finally dropped it, and we started our session. I gestured Lynn to sit down in the chair that I had set up opposite of my chair, and started leading Lynn through her exercises. Peter sat behind me on the couch, which was approximately 6 feet away. I was still a little on edge after the conversation earlier, and was a bit uncomfortable that Peter was now sitting behind me. As I said, he normally would be in his bedroom, so this was odd behavior. But I started to relax as it seemed that the topic was dropped, and things were somewhat back to normal. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and they probably did just genuinely want a new employee to get their business started. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Whoever was there let themselves straight in. They entered the living room and stood over Lynn and I. He looked to be a younger man, maybe mid-30s, so I was thinking it was likely a relative of Lynn or Peter. Oddly though, he didn't say so much as a hello to either Lynn or Peter, or even announce his reason for being there. He just stood there, staring down at me. This is where I stopped doubting myself. Something was very weird here. Lynn stopped doing her exercises and asked the man, "What do you think?" gesturing towards me. The man simply replied with, "Beautiful. She's perfect." Obviously at this point, every damn alarm bell in my brain and body is ringing and telling me to get out of there. But for some reason that I can't explain, I just froze. I stayed seated, mind racing and wondering how I could get out of this situation. I think in the back of my mind, I still wasn't sure if I would be overreacting to get up and leave. But obviously in hindsight, I absolutely should have done just that. The man then sits with Peter behind me, and all three of them began speaking in Mandarin. I could understand a few words that Lynn said in English, speckled throughout the slew of Mandarin, and they all related to things about me. My name, my age, the fact that I have a sister, the fact that my family lives overseas. All things that I had told her during the small talk we had made over the past few months. The young man then gets up and asked for my WhatsApp. I told him I don't use WhatsApp. He then asked me for my WeChat. Again, I told him I don't use WeChat. He then continued to ask about various other communication platforms. And finally, I got the courage to get up and leave. I got up very suddenly and simply said, "Sorry, I'm running late and I have to go." I dashed out of there, down the elevator as quickly as I could, without ever even looking back. Once I got downstairs and outside of the building, I rushed straight to my car, which was parked slightly up the street. And while I was sitting there trying to process and make sense of what had just happened, this younger man comes out from the same exit I had just left through. He looked each way as though he was looking to see which direction I was headed in. And then after not seeing any sign of me, he ultimately walked off, in the opposite direction of where I was parked, thankfully. I then called my manager and told her the entire story. She agreed that I wouldn't be going back there, nor would any of our other staff. I still don't know exactly what these people's intentions were with me. Maybe it was just a super inappropriate attempt at a job offer. But there were just so many red flags about this situation that I'm truly grateful that I was able to get out of there when I did. The whole situation feels shady as could be, and while I'm far away from that situation now, I just can't shake the feeling that I dodged something that could have been life-altering. I'm going to start this story off with a little backstory. I'm a 24-year-old female that fell in love with national parks, so much so that I decided to work full-time at one for about 3 years. This experience allowed me to meet some great people, but it also welcomed some sketchy individuals into my life. This particular story starts with a man that we'll call Sam. Sam was a tall guy with a shaved head and glasses. He was the kind of coworker that would always linger awkwardly. He made everyone feel uncomfortable, but not enough to warrant any real concern. The only issue that I really noticed was that he seemed like he had a drinking problem. He would show up to work still drunk from the night before and be sent home somewhat regularly. He seemed innocent enough, though, in a socially awkward sort of way. I only worked with this man for a few months before I was transferred to another location and offered a pay raise in the process. A few months after starting this new position, I was in the employee break room browsing my newsfeed when I received 5 rapid-fire messages in about a 30-second time span. I didn't even realize people could type that fast. The messages were from Sam, something that in and of itself caught me off guard because I had never spoken to him outside of my last position. The messages consisted of vague threats regarding my friends and myself. He seemed upset to find out that I had gay friends and thought that I was, quote, tainted from association. Now, I was less upset at his foul perception of me and much more pissed that he had targeted my friends, who are truly lovely people. I'm pretty bad when it comes to taking the high road, and I decided to give this man a piece of my mind. We weren't friends, hardly acquaintances, so I didn't feel that his behavior was appropriate, and quite frankly, I was angered by it. Through our exchange, the original rude context of the messages became obviously threatening. He told me that I should die along with my gay friends, and that he'd be more than happy to put us out of our misery. I was shocked. His anger didn't make sense to me, and I realized that I wasn't going to reason with this lunatic, so I decided to get HR involved. We worked within the same company, so I thought this would be the best route to prevent any further harassment. HR advised me to block contact from him while they investigate, but to also alert authorities in case he decided to act on his threats. Authorities were involved and didn't seem too fazed by the messages that I showed them. They almost seemed annoyed that I had even bothered calling them in the first place. I filled out a statement and was told to contact them if anything progressed. The next day, I woke up to find trash all over my front steps. Odd, but not too strange. I actually thought it was a raccoon since I was in a national park. That's when I saw a piece of paper with the words, "Watch your back, bitch," scribbled onto it. I looked around the other neighboring cabins to see if anyone else was watching, but I didn't see a soul. I cleaned up the mess, but I saved the note. I wanted to show my sister who lived with me. When she got back home later that morning, I caught her up on the previous night's events. She didn't even know Sam because, like I said, we weren't friends. Why would I even mention him in my personal life? I gave her a brief description of him in case she saw this man lurking around, and then I headed off to work. Halfway through my shift, I get a phone call from my sister. She sounds shaken when she tells me that a man matching Sam's description came to our cabin and asked about me and where I was. She played dumb and pretended to not even know who I was. After an awkward silence, he said, "I'll be back to get her later," before just walking away. She said he sounded and acted like he had been heavily drinking, and he had this intense coldness to him. Now, I'm not messing around at this point, and I've watched enough crime shows to know that you shouldn't underestimate people. So I called the company's security team and asked to have someone check on my sister and to be escorted home immediately. I'm home within 20 minutes of her phone call. She gave security some more information and they were able to find out which cabin he resided in. Apparently, he only lived about a 2-minute walk down our street, which was pretty unnerving. Park rangers are called again and they get more statements from the both of us, and they decide to pay him a visit. They seem to be taking the situation a bit more seriously now that he knows where I live. They come back after talking to his roommate, and it's confirmed that he lives there but hasn't been home since the night before. Authorities put a word out to keep an eye out for Sam. They offer to have a unit keep an eye on us that night too, which we gladly accept, and we head off to bed. I wake up to 34 messages from a number that I don't know. It was Sam again. He was very angry that I got HR involved, as well as the Rangers. One of the messages read, "You're going to pay for this, bitch. You fucked with the wrong person, and I will fucking end you." I email HR and present them screenshots of the messages and texts. I demand that they resolve this immediately, and want to set up a meeting with the director to discuss termination. See, in national parks, when you're hired, the company provides cheap housing on site, and when you're fired, you have to leave the national park boundary within 24 hours. So I thought this would solve a majority of my issues. They seem to agree with me and try to locate Sam for a meeting. The problem is, no one has seen him since the first messages began 2 days prior. So now, the park is on a manhunt. The park is huge, and it's easy to hide in if you don't want to be found. Thankfully, his roommate alerted officials when Sam stumbled home drunk the next day. They're able to speak with him and sober him up enough to take him to the HR building a couple of hours later. After the meeting, I'm notified that he has been given a first and final write-up and will continue to work and live on my street. He apparently gave some sob story about his personal issues, and he promised to leave me alone. I was baffled that even with him threatening to kill me, they weren't going to fire him. Thankfully, the Rangers were equally surprised and still offered to provide surveillance just in case. It was quiet for 3 days. I thought that this might actually be over and started to feel bad for Sam, actually. I thought maybe he was going through some shit, and I was just his mental punching bag. I didn't agree with it, but I no longer felt as threatened, if that makes any sense at all. That was until I received a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found 2 Rangers wanting to speak with me. According to the Rangers and a few people from the HR department, Sam's roommate had called the emergency line when Sam started acting bizarre after the meeting and tried to convince him to lure me to a secluded place. That way Sam could take care of me. Thankfully, his roommate wasn't a psycho and reported the situation immediately once Sam went to the bathroom. Rangers were on site within minutes and had restrained Sam in order to search their cabin for evidence. They ended up finding a loaded firearm and a suspected suicide note that stated he was going to take my life and then take his own. There was plenty of evidence for a case, and he was successfully banned from all national parks in the US. I've since moved to a different state and have changed my contact information. Before I changed my phone number, though, Sam contacted me once to brag about how much I helped him secure unemployment benefits, which I then quickly shared with officials. According to these officials, he's restricted to a southern Arizona county due to other crimes that he later committed, and that I shouldn't worry about him finding me. As for HR, the director actually had to deal with harassment from Sam after the banning and asked me to testify on her behalf if it turned into something more sinister. I haven't heard anything since, so I'm assuming she found another way to stop his assault. I don't understand why he decided to target me. After all, we hadn't had very many interactions at work. I've tried to dig through memories to find a single time that I may have invited this kind of behavior onto myself, but I'm convinced that this was due to many factors, not the least of which involving his instability and his alcoholism. I'm sharing this story partly for cathartic purposes, but also because I've never put this story to paper. By doing so, I'm hoping to fill the black hole in my memory about this event. I only remember this creepy occurrence up to a certain point, and then it's just gone. After college, I wanted to volunteer in my community in a meaningful way, and I chose to become a suicide and crisis lifeline volunteer. The training for this was every Saturday for 2 straight months, and each session lasted several hours. It was intense and a big commitment, but I felt empowered to help someone at their lowest point and keep them safe for another day. Once I started answering the phones as a lifeline volunteer, it was heartbreaking and energetically taxing, but also incredibly rewarding, and I tried my very best to connect with anyone that heard my voice on the other end of their line. My fellow volunteers were a huge reason I was in any way successful, as they provided support and encouragement, and sometimes even ideas on what to say. We were all pretty tight-knit in my class of volunteers, and I assumed anyone else who worked or volunteered there was as compassionate, lovely, and trustworthy as the people that I had trained with. This included Greg, a volunteer who wasn't in my cohort group, but who I started to casually get to know through working a lot of the same shifts. He was about 50-something to my mid-20s. He was somewhat of a legend at Lifeline, as he had volunteered there steadily for decades and was both a military vet and a recovering alcoholic. He was able to reach and help so many people through his own story, or so that's what I always heard. So when Greg asked me to dog sit for him for a few hours one night, I was happy to oblige. I love dogs, and he had to be at least a decent person for all the good that I heard about him. He gave me his home address, and we arranged for me to come by Friday night to meet his dogs and get all the usual instructions before he left. I made my way to his neighborhood and parked in front of a very normal, nice-looking 2-story home. Greg met me at the front door with his 2 sweet golden retrievers, whom I immediately fell in love with. He showed me their food and said they'd already been walked twice, so I could just let the dogs into the fenced backyard for a quick piddle if they needed. He was going to leave, and I would basically just hang with the dogs for the next few hours, then leave for the night, and Greg would be coming back early the next day. As he pointed things out to me in his house, Greg was super friendly and enthusiastic, just like he'd always been at the crisis center. Greg was a rotund man, with a gray goatee and a wide smile with gap teeth. He seemed a little dressed up to me with his shiny collared shirt, but I thought he was maybe going to a fancy event. Just as I'm wondering when Greg's going to actually leave, he asks if I'd like to see the upstairs of his house. It strikes me as a little weird, but I thought, hey, he's proud of his home. That's cool. I said sure, and he led me up the carpeted stairs and down a dark hallway. He opened his bedroom door, which had only been slightly cracked. He walked into the room and turned around to say, yeah, so this is my bedroom. His giant bed took up most of the room and had this red velvet canopy. There was black lace all over, on the curtains, the pillows, the comforter. The decor was like French boudoir, when the rest of the house was in the style of single dude. And most concerning of all, there were at least 4 candles lit. He proceeded to then sit on his bed and smile at me expectantly, waggling his big bushy eyebrows. I laughed incredulously, backing up a little. I think I said something like, I think you got the wrong idea, to which he brought up some flirty comment he had overheard me say to a fellow volunteer that I had a little crush on. Then he smiled again and patted the bed next to him. My mouth fell open as I realized that because he overheard me say something that was maybe a little risque, he really thought I was open to some kind of tawdry dog-sitting fling. And not to toot my own horn, but I was young and cute then, and he was, well, not either one of those things. I thought this guy was rather beastly and old, and I in no way ever flirted with him. I wish I could say I had some witty zinger to shut down his gross attempt at romance, but I was far too shocked to do anything other than cross my arms over my chest and shake my head no. His face dropped, and he lost his Letterman-esque smile. Then it was like a cold chill came into the room. Well, I better get going, he said, and looked at me with absolute darkness and disdain, barely even trying to conceal his disappointment. I could tell he was embarrassed. I mean, I was too. He grumbled as he hastily blew out the candles and then started walking toward me in the bedroom door to leave. I quickly scooted out of the room before him, almost jumping down the stairs. Within minutes, Greg had grabbed his keys and left through the garage, closing it after him. Before he left, he bitterly said to call him if there were any problems. When he was gone, it was deathly silent, except for the click of the dog's nails on the linoleum as they danced around me. My heart was pounding. I wanted to get out of there, but I also wanted to make sure the dogs were okay. Plus, I did feel a bit better with him out of the house. The next few hours would pass uneventfully. When it was about 8 or 9 at night, I was ready to leave. Then I realized Greg hadn't left me with a key of any kind. I checked the front door in hopes it would be the kind where you don't need a key to lock it. You know, the push-in lock type. But it was a deadbolt. I had a weird sinking feeling in my chest. I went out the sliding glass door to the backyard, and there was no egress that I could find. I called Greg. He sounded amused again when he answered. Greg, "You forgot to give me a key to lock up your house," I said in what I tried to make a calm, almost jokey voice. "Oh, whoops," he replied, not really sounding surprised at all. He even chuckled a little bit. "Maybe you can get out through the garage," he suggested, and I liked that idea. "Or if that doesn't work, you can just sleep in my bed," he suggested casually. Gross. I didn't like that idea, and I just chose to ignore it. He told me to call him back if I needed him to come home. I assured him that I would be fine. I went to the dark garage, turned on the light, and shut myself in so the dogs would be in the house and not escape. Then I opened the garage door and did that thing where you close it and run underneath it. Only I hadn't done that maneuver for over a decade, and this was one of those newfangled safe version of a garage door that would detect an object underneath it and not close. As the door bounced back up, I thought, fucking Greg knew this would happen. I just felt it. My last memory is letting the golden retrievers who had been whining and scratching at the door into the garage with me after the garage door closed, and then hugging them as I cried into the fur of their necks. I had had enough, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. Then, try as I might, I can't remember what happened next. Did I call Greg back and he came home? Did I call someone else? Did I just leave the door unlocked despite my people-pleaser personality? I've tried and tried to remember, but it's almost like I blacked out after that moment in the garage. Maybe my brain is protecting me from something. I don't know if I ever saw Greg again after this. I just can't really remember. The man died suddenly of a heart attack a few years later, which I found out through a mutual volunteer friend on Facebook. I got an ugly pit in my stomach when I heard the news, and was also kind of angry seeing everyone praising him on his wall. I kept picturing him patting the bed next to him in his bedroom with that smirk on his face. I'm glad that he helped all the people that he did, but I was a naive young woman who was doing him a favor. And I didn't expect, nor do I feel like I deserve, to be hit on. I also now realize that he probably didn't need a dog sitter at all, and just set this whole thing up to try and get lucky. When I rebuffed him, I reckon that he just went and sat at an Arby's nearby. I don't mean to talk down on the man, or on Arby's as an establishment, but when one goes through the lengths that he did to get me alone and in his bedroom, only to have whatever would-be plan fall flat on its face, one probably needs a roast beef sandwich and a lackluster milkshake to bounce back. I still don't have a clue why I can't remember the rest of the night. Everything else comes back as a clear picture in my mind. But for the life of me, I don't remember leaving that house that night. I don't remember walking through my own door. And I don't remember Greg for a moment after he walked out that night. The human memory is a strange thing. I know that it doesn't work like a video recorder, but I can't help that it feels like something recorded over that stretch of time after my garage breakdown. Maybe it's for the better. I just can't say. When I was 7 years old, something happened in my life that I didn't really understand until much later. At the time, it didn't feel scary or dangerous, it just felt strange. It wasn't until I was a teenager talking about it with a friend that they stopped me mid-story and said, "Wait, dude, you were kidnapped." That was the first time it actually hit me what had happened. I was in second grade, and most afternoons I came home from school before my parents and older sister. That was normal. My sister had sports practice, and my parents both worked until around 5. I'd usually get an hour or so to myself, which honestly felt pretty cool at that age. I'd grab a snack, turn on cartoons, and wait for everyone else to come home. My parents had the usual rules drilled into me. Don't answer the phone, don't open the door for strangers, don't tell anyone you're home alone. Pretty simple stuff. That day was supposed to be just like any other. But maybe 10 or 15 minutes after I got home, someone started knocking on the door. At first, it was soft. Then it got louder. Then came the doorbell, over and over again. I remember standing in the hallway frozen. My parents had been really clear about what to do in the situation. Ignore it. Don't answer. Just wait. So that's what I did, at least for a while. But the knocking just didn't stop. And it went on long enough that my curiosity started to win. I crept over to the window near the balcony to peek outside, and that's when I saw a couple of familiar faces. The people knocking were friends of my parents, a neighborhood couple, a man and a woman. They'd been over to our house for barbecues, sent Christmas cards, and my mom had even called the woman one of her best friends. When they saw me looking through the glass, the woman smiled and waved for me to come down. I remember feeling this wave of relief. They weren't strangers. I went to the door, cracked it open just a little bit, and she immediately said something like, "Honey, we need you to come with us. Your sister had an accident at practice and your parents asked us to pick you up. She's okay, but they're at the hospital right now." That explanation made perfect sense to my 7-year-old brain. It was someone I knew, someone that my parents trusted, and something bad had happened. Of course I'd go with them. I didn't even think twice about it. I left my snack on the counter, my backpack by the door, and I even forgot my little flip phone on the kitchen table. I got in the car with them and we took off. The ride was quiet at first. I sat in the back seat while they whispered to each other in the front. I remember the woman glancing at me through the mirror a few times, smiling, but the man, he didn't say much. When I asked if we were going to the hospital, she said, "It's a bit of a drive, sweetheart. You're going to be staying with us tonight." I remember asking why, but she just brushed it off with something like, "Your parents need time to deal with things." Even though something about this didn't make sense, I didn't argue. They were adults. When we finally got to their house, or what I thought was their house, it didn't look the same as I remembered. The walls were a different color and there were toys in the yard that I didn't recognize. I said something about that too, and the woman just laughed, told me that they had recently moved. Once we were inside though, everything seemed normal again. She made dinner, put on one of my favorite Barbie movies, and gave me a blanket to curl up with on the couch. They even had this small, fluffy dog that instantly became my favorite part of this entire situation. I fell asleep that night on their couch, with the dog tucked right up next to me. I used to tell people that I'd stayed with them for maybe 3 or 4 days. But when I asked my mom about this years later, she said that I had been gone for 2 weeks. 14 full days. While I was happily watching movies and playing in their backyard, my parents were losing their minds. My parents had called the police. My school was put on notice, and my friends' parents were searching the neighborhood. My entire family thought that I'd been abducted, because looking back, I had been. The woman that took me, she was apparently in contact with my mom for almost the entire time I was gone, pretending to be supportive, saying things like, "They'll find her, don't worry," or maybe she just went to a friend's house. All while I was sitting in her living room, completely unaware of what was going on. Now, I don't remember much fear during that time, which is what makes this whole thing so surreal. They weren't cruel. They didn't hurt me. They just treated me like I was supposed to be there. We'd go on walks in the woods behind their house, collect leaves and play with the dog. The woman, who I'll call her Lisa from this point on, would braid my hair and help me draw pictures. It felt like some weird vacation. The only time things got uncomfortable was one afternoon when I asked when I'd be able to see my parents. Lisa's face changed completely. Her voice got sharp. She said, "Don't ask about that again. You'll see them when you're supposed to." I didn't know what that meant, but her tone scared me enough that I just didn't bring it up again. I think after that, I stopped asking all questions altogether. The day that they found me was pure chaos. I remember being half asleep in one of the bedrooms when a deafening crash shook the house. The door burst open and people started yelling. Before I knew it, there were police everywhere, shouting, running, shining flashlights. They eventually found me in the room, asked me my name, and pulled me out into the front yard. The next thing I remember, my mom appeared, screaming my name and dragging me into her arms. I remember being so confused, asking if we could bring the dog with us. Apparently, that question made my mom furious. She would later tell me that she almost hit the officer who tried to stop her from taking me away. My dad was yelling. The police were yelling. Everyone was yelling. It seemed like nobody knew what to do first. It was absolute pandemonium. After the police rounded up all the evidence they could, they told my parents what these people's plan was. They had no desire to hold me for ransom or any plans to hurt me. They just wanted to keep me. That's the part that really creeps me out, even now as an adult. Because when I think back on it, there wasn't any violence. Everything was quiet and soft, like they were just playing house. And I was the missing piece. When I told this story for the first time at 15, the friend that I was telling this to went pale. She's the one that told me that's not a weird childhood story. You were taken. And I think that was the first time that it ever hit me like a punch to the chest. She was right. At 7 years old, I walked out my front door with people that I thought I trusted. And for 2 whole weeks, nobody knew where I was. I think that's what makes it so creepy when I look back now. It wasn't some dramatic crime scene or this terrifying escape. It was ordinary. It was polite even. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because it taught me that sometimes the people you should fear the most are the ones who smile kindly and tell you that everything's going to be okay. The cops would say that apparently they had had the idea to try and take me for a while, that they had been trying to figure out when would be best to act on their plan. And it would seem that a random Tuesday between when I got home and my parents did was the time that they chose. It's scary to think that the times they had been over to our house before, they were likely figuring out just how they wanted to lure me outside. As far as consequences go, Lisa and her husband went away to prison. I'm not sure how long they each got, but when I was about 16, my parents got a letter in the mail from the Department of Corrections saying that the husband was set to be released in the next year. At that point, we had already moved a few times since this incident, so it wasn't really a reason for concern. That would be the last time that anyone officially brought up Lisa or her dude. I've gone through therapy for this after it was brought up that I might have some deep-seated trauma due to things that I can't willingly recall. But so far, I haven't unearthed anything. The thing that really sticks with me though, and no detective or therapist has ever been able to explain away, is what was the entirety of the plan? Was I just going to live with them in that house that wasn't very far from my own for the rest of my days? Were they going to pick up and move somewhere else? Start calling me by a different name or something? The act of taking me is terrifying as I look at it now, but not knowing what direction things were heading scares me even more.